Hey guys, tonight we're stepping softly into a 1950s American bedroom where the vanity mirror is glowing with a little yellow lamp. The perfume bottle is shaped like something expensive, and a young woman is sitting very still while her hair dries into place. On the outside, nothing dramatic is happening. No sirens, no scandal, no great historical speech on the radio. Just a quiet room, a cotton dress hanging from the closet door, and a calendar on the wall that seems to be looking back at her with a judgmental little smile. But somewhere under the powder, the lipstick and the careful curls there is a deadline no one has written down. She's 24, maybe 23, maybe already 25, which in some living rooms might as well be announced with thunder. Tonight, before we open that closet door and step into her world, tell me in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is where you are. Are you listening late at night, early in the morning, or somewhere between sleep and an old memory? And if these quiet stories about hidden rules, forgotten pressure, and old American life keep you company, take a second to subscribe to the Nostalgian, only if you enjoy what we do here. Now dim the lights, settle into your pillow, and let us visit a world where love was supposed to arrive on schedule, preferably before everyone at the dinner table began to worry. Imagine waking up in 1957 with the soft clatter of dishes already moving somewhere downstairs. The house smells faintly of coffee, starch cold cream and toast that is 1 minute away from becoming a family incident. Your room is neat because it has to be. A chenille bedspread, a small radio, a stack of magazines with smiling brides on the covers. Somewhere in one of those magazines, a young woman just like you is holding a bouquet, laughing at something her handsome fiancé has said, though the photographer has not allowed him to have a visible personality. She looks radiant. She looks chosen. She looks safe. And that word chosen sits quietly in the room with you. You're not a child anymore. You're not quite considered settled either. You're in that delicate middle place where every birthday begins to sound less like a celebration and more like a countdown. Nobody says you must find a husband before 25, at least not always so directly. They say softer things. You'll meet someone soon. Don't be too particular. A pretty girl like you shouldn't wait too long. Your cousin Elaine already has 2 children. Every sentence is wrapped in kindness, but the bow is tied very tight. You sit at the vanity and lean toward the mirror. The face looking back is familiar, but now everyone else seems to be reading it like a public notice. Are you still youthful enough, pleasant enough, feminine enough, easygoing enough? Do you look like a wife, not a person with thoughts exactly? Not yet a tired mother, not yet a woman with grocery lists and a husband's shirts to iron, but the promise of one. That was the strange thing about this stage of life for many young women in 1950s America. You were expected to be interesting but not intimidating, pretty but not vain, smart but not so smart that a man might feel he was being interviewed for a bank loan. You could laugh, but not too loudly. Have opinions, but not too many. Work perhaps, but not seem married to the job. Want love, but never appear desperate. It was less like dating and more like carrying a tray full of teacups through a room where everyone was pretending not to watch. Downstairs, your mother is already awake. Of course she is. Mothers in these stories always seem to be awake before the moral pressure has even put on its shoes. She's at the kitchen table wearing a house dress and the serious expression of a woman who has opinions about your future but is trying to butter toast first. She asks if you're going to the church social on Friday. You say maybe. She says maybe is not how you meet people. You stir your coffee and pretend to be fascinated by the cream swirling in the cup. Your father rustles the newspaper and offers the helpful wisdom of a man who believes a good husband appears the moment a girl stops making a fuss. He says, There are plenty of nice young men around. And just like that, breakfast becomes a tiny courtroom. Nobody is shouting. Nobody is cruel. In fact, everyone may love you very much. That is what makes it harder. The pressure comes wearing slippers. It passes the jam. It asks whether you have plans this weekend. Outside the kitchen window, the neighborhood is beginning its ordinary day. A milk truck rattles along. A child drags a bicycle from a garage. Across the street, a newly married woman steps out to shake a dustcloth, and she already has that look people reward. Settled, accounted for, properly placed in the world. Her wedding announcement was in the local paper last spring. Her shower had little sandwiches, pastel napkins, and enough advice to fill a government manual. Now people speak about her differently. They ask about her curtains, her recipes, her husband's job, whether she's hoping for a baby soon. The questions do not stop after marriage. They simply change uniforms. But from where you are standing, unmarried and old enough for relatives to start clearing their throats, marriage looks like a gate everyone expects you to pass through before the hinges rust. By 25, in many middle-class circles, people began to worry in a special polite way. Not panic exactly, because panic would be rude, but a soft, steady concern. The kind that appears at family gatherings when an aunt touches your arm and says, "Now, dear, is there anyone special?" She already knows the answer, of course. She's been collecting evidence since Thanksgiving. You say, "No one serious." She smiles too brightly as if you have announced a minor medical condition. "Well, don't wait forever," she says, and then turns back to the potato salad as though she's not just placed a small stone in your chest. That was one of the unspoken rules. A woman could be single for a while, but she was expected to be single in motion, moving toward the altar, moving toward a ring, moving toward proof that somebody had selected her from the crowd before the crowd started asking why not. And the word why could be merciless. Why was she still single? Was she too picky, too educated, too plain, too independent, too shy, too serious, too modern, too much of something, or not enough of something else? The question could hang around a woman like the smell of cigarette smoke in a wool coat. It followed her to the office, to church, to the beauty parlour, to cousin weddings, where she stood in the reception line congratulating girls younger than herself. At every wedding, someone would say, "You'll be next." At first it felt playful, then it became prophecy, then it became a small public test you had not agreed to take. You learned to laugh. You learned to tilt your head and say, "We'll see." You learned that a woman could be tired of a question long before anyone else was tired of asking it. Still, there was romance in the picture, and that is important too. Not all of it was cold pressure and social bookkeeping. Many young women did want love marriage, a home children, the whole bright arrangement promised in advertisements and movies. They wanted dances, phone calls, Sunday drives, a man who opened doors and remembered birthdays, a kitchen where the future smelled like coffee and new curtains. The dream was not fake simply because it was pressured. That is what makes the story complicated. The same world that offered tenderness also narrowed the path. It told women that love was the prize, but it also warned them not to miss their turn. It handed them bridal magazines before it handed them room to wonder who they might become if no proposal arrived on schedule. So you finish your coffee, smooth your skirt, and prepare to step into the day. Maybe you're going to work as a secretary, where the older men call you Miss, and the other girls compare engagement rings over lunch. Maybe you're going to college, where people joke about getting an MRS degree as though matrimony were a major with excellent housing benefits. Maybe you're helping at home folding laundry, while your mother explains that a woman cannot be too careful with her reputation. Wherever you go, the invisible deadline goes with you. It does not tick like a clock. It hums. It hides inside compliments. It waits behind questions. It sits beside you in the passenger seat when a young man drives you home, and you wonder whether he is just being nice or whether your whole future is supposed to begin in this car. And tonight, as we begin this story, we're not here to laugh at those women or turn their lives into a simple warning. We're here to sit beside them for a while, to notice the little rules that shape their choices, to hear the silence between the jokes at the dinner table, to understand how a birthday could feel like both a cake and a verdict. Because for many young women in 1950s, America 25 was not just an age. It was a question mark wearing lipstick. It was the moment when the world leaned closer and asked gently but firmly, "What are you waiting for?" And as the morning light moves across the vanity mirror, and the calendar hangs quietly on the wall, that question is only beginning to follow her through the day. The strange thing about 25 was that it did not arrive with a bell. There was no town siren, no official letter, no serious man in a grey suit knocking at the door with a clipboard and a warning. It arrived quietly folded into birthday cards, family jokes, bridal shower invitations, and the small pause after someone asked whether you were seeing anyone special. You could still be young at 25. Your face could still be soft, your hands still smooth your laugh, still bright across a soda fountain booth. But in many corners of 1950s, America, especially in the middle-class world of church socials, office pools, college mixers, and Sunday family dinners, 25 had a way of sounding older than it really was. Not old in the body, not old in the soul, old in the marketplace of marriage, which was perhaps the most absurd little department store ever invented by polite society. You felt it first in the way people changed their tone. At 19 they teased you. At 21 they smiled knowingly. At 23 they began making introductions with a little too much energy. But by 25 the same relatives who once told you not to rush suddenly looked at you as if you had missed the bus to the rest of your life. Your aunt might lean over during dessert and say, "You know, dear time does move quickly." Your mother might mention the son of someone from church, a perfectly nice young man who worked in insurance and owned 2 suits, which apparently made him sound like a national treasure. Even the neighbours could become amateur marriage forecasters, reading your future the way some people read weather signs. No ring yet, no steady fellow, no announcement in the local paper, cloudy skies ahead with a chance of casserole-based concern. In the 1950s, marriage was not just a private relationship. For many people, it was the doorway into recognized adulthood. A man might be considered on his way when he had a job, a car, a service record, or a clean shirt that survived breakfast. But a woman was often judged by whether she was moving toward wifehood. The whole culture seemed arranged like a long hallway leading to a wedding reception. Girls were taught manners, grooming, cooking, sewing, smiling, and the subtle art of seeming agreeable without appearing empty-headed. Magazines offered recipes and romance advice in the same soft voice, as if a good meatloaf and a good marriage required identical skills. Patience, timing, and never admitting the middle was undercooked. By the time a woman reached her mid-20s without a husband, people did not always know what story to tell about her. And when society cannot understand a woman, it often begins to invent explanations. Maybe she was too picky, they said. Maybe she wanted too much. Maybe she spent too much time at the office. Maybe she had opinions. Maybe she'd been hurt once and never said so. Maybe she was waiting for a man who did not exist outside of movie posters and very optimistic novels. No one liked to imagine that she might simply not have found the right person, or that the choices around her were narrower than they looked from the outside. That would have required sympathy, and sympathy in a well-polished living room could be harder to serve than coffee. So instead people reached for labels: old maid, spinster, career girl. Poor dear. Some of these words were spoken lightly, even jokingly, but they had little hooks in them. They could catch on a woman's dress and follow her home. 25 became a warning bell because it sat right at the edge of the accepted story. Younger than that, people could still say you were enjoying yourself. You were dating. You were working for a while. You were helping at home. You were waiting for the right man, and waiting still sounded graceful. But after 25, waiting began to sound suspicious. It became something people wanted explained. Your singleness stopped being a temporary chapter and started being treated like a condition. There was a special humiliation in that because nothing about your daily life might have changed. You still woke up dressed carefully, rode the bus, answered phones, typed letters, paid for lipstick, went to movies, sent birthday cards, and carried your own small hopes through the day. But suddenly, the world had placed a question mark over you, and everyone seemed to think it was their duty to read it aloud. Picture yourself walking into an office on a Tuesday morning. The air smells of paper carbon copies, cigarette smoke, and someone's drugstore perfume blooming bravely near the coat rack. You hang up your coat, sit at your desk, and roll a fresh sheet into the typewriter. Around you, other women are talking softly. One is engaged. One is newly married and still says "my husband" with the careful shine of a woman polishing a new appliance. One is planning a bridal shower and asking if pink napkins would be too much. You smile and say they sound lovely, and they do. You're not bitter, not exactly. But every engagement ring in the room seems to flash like a tiny lighthouse, guiding everyone else towards shore while you sit quietly in the boat pretending you enjoy the view. At lunch, the conversation turns to wedding dates, apartment hunting, mother-in-law advice, and whether a girl should keep working after marriage. Someone says, "Of course I'll stop once the children come." Someone else says her fiancé wants her home right away. Then there is a pause, not long enough to accuse anyone of anything, but long enough for you to feel it. You are the one still available, still unclaimed by the story everyone else is entering. Maybe you make a joke. Maybe you say you are waiting for a millionaire with good hair and no mother. The women laugh because it is funny, and because laughter is sometimes the most respectable way to hide discomfort. Then everyone returns to their sandwiches, and you fold your napkin very neatly, as if neatness can protect you from being noticed. The warning bell also rang in family homes where a woman's future could become a household project. Mothers especially were placed in a difficult role. Many had been taught that a daughter's marriage reflected not only the daughter, but the whole family. If a girl married well, it suggested good upbringing, good manners, good prospects, and a home where the curtains had probably behaved themselves. If she did not, people wondered what had gone wrong. So a mother might worry out of love, pride, fear, or habit, sometimes all at once. She might urge you to wear the blue dress because it made your eyes stand out. She might remind you not to sound too sharp when speaking to a young man. She might say, "Men like a girl who listens," which is the kind of sentence that can make a daughter consider marrying the first person who invents earplugs. Fathers could be quieter, but their silence carried its own weight. Some wanted daughters protected, provided for, placed safely in respectable households. The world did not always offer women the same financial independence or social freedom it offered men, and marriage could seem from a parent's chair like security. A husband meant a home, a name, a place at the table of adult society. This did not mean every marriage were happy or every unmarried woman was lost. But the cultural imagination of the 1950s often struggled to picture a woman living fully outside marriage. It could picture her as a secretary, a teacher, a nurse, a devoted daughter, a maiden aunt, perhaps even a glamorous courier woman in the city. but it often treated these lives as waiting rooms, not destinations. 25 mattered because people began to suspect you might be settling into the waiting room and asking for curtains. And then there were the weddings. If you want to understand why 25 felt like a warning bell, sit through enough weddings as the single friend. Watch younger cousins glide down aisles under clouds of tulle. Stand in receiving lines while strangers ask when your turn will come. Help tie ribbons around shower gifts for girls who used to borrow your sweaters. Smile for photographs where everyone is arranged in pairs and you're placed at the end beside someone's uncle who smells faintly of aftershave and ham. Weddings were beautiful, yes. They could be tender and hopeful and full of real joy. But they also worked like public clocks. Every bouquet toss was a little ceremony of expectation. Every engagement announcement moved someone else forward on the board. If life were a game, the married girls had reached the next square and you were still waiting to roll. By 25, the fear was not simply that you would be alone. It was that you would be interpreted. People might read your life as failure before they knew its contents. They might confuse independence with loneliness standards, with stubbornness education, with arrogance, shyness, with defect work, with compensation. A woman could be entirely ordinary and still become a neighborhood mystery. She could buy groceries, attend church, care for parents, hold a job, remember birthdays, and still be discussed as though she were an unsolved problem wrapped in a cardigan. That was the quiet cruelty of the deadline. It made a normal human life feel overdue. And yet beneath all this pressure, many women kept moving with remarkable grace. They curled their hair, went to work, danced at weddings, wrote thank you notes, and answered questions they never should have had to answer. Some did marry happily or unhappily before the world could worry too loudly. Some married later. Some never married at all, and built lives that were fuller than the gossip allowed. But in the moment, sitting in that 1950s kitchen with the clock ticking over the stove, 25 could feel like a line drawn in invisible ink. You might not see it until you stepped across it. Then suddenly everyone else seemed to see it for you. So tonight, when we talk about age 25, we're not talking about a law. We're talking about a sound, a soft bell in the background of ordinary life. It rang in magazine pages, family comments, office chatter, church socials, and the silence after another friend announced her engagement. It rang not because a woman had become old, but because the culture around her had become impatient. And as you stand there in your best dress, smiling politely while someone says, "There is still time," you begin to understand the strange little warning hidden inside those words. There is still time means the clock has already started, and somewhere just beyond the edge of the room, everyone is listening for what happens next. Before a girl ever sat across from a young man in a soda shop, before she ever waited beside the telephone pretending not to wait, before she ever heard an aunt say, "You'll be next," the lessons had already begun. They started in childhood, quietly, almost sweetly folded into playtime chores, compliments, Sunday dresses, and the way grown-ups smiled when a little girl carried a doll on her hip. No one needed to sit her down at the kitchen table and announce that marriage was the main road ahead. The message was already everywhere. It was in the toy stove, in the baby doll with the painted eyelids, in the tiny apron tied around her waist, while her brother was outside being told to aim higher, run faster, throw harder, and for heaven's sake stop tracking mud through the house. Picture yourself as a little girl in 1950s, America standing on a linoleum kitchen floor, while your mother moves around you with the tired grace of someone who has done the same thing every morning for years. The radio is playing softly. The curtains lift a little in the warm air. There is flour on the counter, a dish towel over one shoulder, and a mother who loves you, but also lives inside a world with rules she did not invent. She hands you a spoon and says you may help stir the cake batter. You feel important, you feel included. The bowl is heavy, the batter smells like vanilla, and for a moment the kitchen seems like the center of everything good. What you do not know yet is that this sweetness is also training. Not cruel training, not always conscious training, but training all the same. You're learning that a good girl helps, a good girl watches, a good girl becomes useful before she becomes herself. The lessons were often disguised as praise. She's such a little lady. She'll make someone a fine wife someday. Look how nicely she takes care of her baby doll. These words could sound warm, even charming. Adults said them with affection, and sometimes they meant no harm at all. But children are excellent collectors of hidden meanings. A girl heard that her kindness, her neatness, her patience, and her ability to sit still were not just qualities. They were predictions. Her future was spoken about as if it already had furniture in it. A husband, a house, children, a kitchen where she would one day stand older and more tired handing a spoon to a daughter of her own. Before she knew what marriage was, she knew it was something people expected her to be good at. Dolls were part of the lesson. Baby dolls with bottles, bride dolls with satin dresses, paper dolls with wardrobes for every occasion, as if life were mostly a matter of choosing the correct outfit, while destiny waited politely in the next room. A little girl could rock a plastic baby to sleep and hear an adult say, "You're a natural." Natural at what exactly? At soothing, at serving, at becoming the kind of woman who would know what to do without being asked. Meanwhile, toy advertisements often smiled at girls from the pages of catalogues offering miniature kitchens, tiny irons, child-sized washing sets and pretend grocery carts. It was all play, yes. But play has always been one of society's favourite rehearsal spaces. A boy might receive trucks, chemistry sets, space helmets and toy soldiers. A girl might receive a doll that needed feeding, a stove that needed tending, and a little broom that looked suspiciously like tomorrow. School carried the lessons forward in a more polished voice. In many classrooms, girls were praised for being neat, polite, cooperative and careful. Their handwriting mattered. Their posture mattered. Their hems mattered. A girl learned the importance of being agreeable before she had the vocabulary to question why agreement was so highly valued. In home economics classes, many students learned cooking, sewing, meal planning, nutrition, laundry table setting, and household management. These skills were practical, and many women took pride in them. There was nothing small about feeding people, running a home, stretching a budget, or keeping a family alive through ordinary days. But the quiet message underneath was often clear. A girl's education was not only for her mind, it was preparation for a household that did not yet exist, but was already waiting for her like an assigned seat. Imagine sitting in a classroom with posters on the wall and the smell of chalk in the air, learning how to set a proper table. Forks on the left, knife on the right, napkin folded neatly, not dramatically, because apparently even napkins had reputations to protect. You're told that presentation matters. A meal should be balanced. A home should be welcoming. A wife should know how to make guests comfortable. No one says that your worth depends on whether the peas are in the correct dish. That would sound too blunt, and the 1950s preferred its pressure with a lace border. But you understand. Order is feminine, care is feminine. Anticipating other people's needs is feminine. And if you do these things well enough, perhaps one day someone will choose you, and everyone will say they always knew you would make a lovely wife. There were lessons in church too in many communities. Lessons about modesty, patience, selflessness, family and respectable womanhood. Sunday mornings had their own choreography. Gloves, hats, polished shoes, hymnals, and the careful business of being seen behaving properly. A girl might sit beside her mother looking down at her folded hands, hearing sermons about home duty virtue and the sacredness of family life. Much of it could be comforting. Communities gave people belonging, ritual language and support. But they also watched. They noticed which girls were sweet, which girls were bold, which girls laughed too freely after service, and which girls seemed to attract attention from boys. Respectability was not just taught, it was monitored. A girl learned that her future marriage prospects were connected to her reputation long before she'd done anything worth having a reputation about. At home, the lessons came in small corrections. Sit nicely, don't interrupt, help your brother, don't be bossy, smile when Mrs. Patterson speaks to you, let the boys carry the heavy things, don't climb in that dress, don't get your shoes dirty, don't make a scene. Each sentence on its own was ordinary, almost forgettable. Together they formed a map. The map pointed toward a version of womanhood that was pleasant, attractive, capable and careful not to disturb the room. A girl could be clever but not cutting, ambitious but not obvious, pretty but not proud, helpful but not resentful. The future wife was being assembled one instruction at a time like a hope chest, filled before anyone asked whether she wanted the house that went with it. And there really were hope chests in some homes, those quiet wooden boxes that held linens, embroidered towels, tablecloths, and sometimes dreams that had been folded so many times they had permanent creases. A girl might receive dish towels, pillowcases, or delicate household things meant for the home she would someday create. The chest could feel romantic. It could feel grown-up. It could smell like cedar and possibility. But it also sat there like a piece of furniture from the future, reminding her that childhood was not just childhood. It was a waiting room for marriage. Every saved sheet, every embroidered cloth, every whispered plan about someday suggested that her adult life had already been imagined by other people, right down to the guest towels. Magazines added their glossy instruction. Young girls and teenagers could see beautiful women smiling beside appliances, cakes, babies, and handsome men in suits. Advice columns suggested how to be popular, how to dress, how to behave on dates, how to avoid seeming too eager, too cold, too smart, too silly, too anything. The ideal girl was a balancing act in saddle shoes. She was cheerful without being noisy, attractive without being dangerous, intelligent enough to hold conversation, but not so brilliant that she frightened a young man into silence. She was supposed to become the kind of woman a man could imagine bringing home to his mother, which is a strange burden to place on someone still worrying about algebra homework and whether her bangs were behaving. Not every girl absorbed these lessons in the same way. Some resisted quietly. Some dreamed of college travel work, art, medicine, business, or a room of their own where nobody commented on their table manners. Some families encouraged ambition. Some communities made more space than others. Race, class, religion, region, and family circumstance shaped the lesson book differently for different girls. A farm daughter, a working-class city girl, a black girl navigating segregation and limited opportunity, a Catholic schoolgirl, a Jewish girl in a tight-knit neighborhood, a college-bound suburban daughter, each lived inside different pressures. But across many parts of the culture, the direction remained familiar. Marriage was presented not as one possible road, but as the road that made the rest of life legible. The tenderness of the story is that many of these lessons came from people who loved their daughters. Mothers who had few choices often taught the choices they understood. Grandmothers passed down survival skills disguised as manners. Teachers prepared girls for the world they believed was waiting. Aunts offered advice because they knew how quickly society could judge a woman who stepped outside the expected pattern. It is easy from far away to call it narrow, and it was. But inside the homes where these lessons lived, they were often wrapped in care. A mother fixing her daughter's collar before a dance might not have been trying to limit her. She may have been trying to protect her from a world that punished girls for the smallest missteps and then called it character. So by the time a young woman reached dating age, the marriage deadline did not appear suddenly. It had been ticking softly for years. It was in the doll cradle, the church pew, the home economics room, the magazine quiz, the hope chest, the dinner table, and the compliment that sounded sweet until you heard the future hidden inside it. She'd been taught to prepare, to wait, to smile, to become ready for a life everyone assumed would arrive. And when the first boy called, when the first dance invitation came, when the first corsage was pinned carefully to her dress, it did not feel like a simple evening out. It felt like the next lesson beginning under gymnasium lights with music playing and everyone watching to see whether she already knew the steps. High school dating in 1950s. America did not begin with love. Not really. It began with observation. It began with who walked home with whom, who sat beside whom at the basketball game, who passed a folded note in English class, and who waited by the lockers a little too long, pretending to look for a textbook that had been in her arms the entire time. Before anyone called it romance, the whole school had already turned it into evidence. A girl could wake up one morning thinking she was simply going to algebra, and by lunch 3 people might have decided she was sweet on Bobby Miller, because he carried her books 12 feet down the hall. 12 feet. In some schools there was practically an engagement announcement with a geometry book. Imagine yourself at 16 standing in front of the bathroom mirror before school, trying to make your hair behave with the kind of seriousness usually reserved for international diplomacy. The skirt is pressed, the blouse is tucked in, the saddle shoes are clean enough to suggest your family has standards. Downstairs your mother calls that you will miss the bus, which is her morning way of saying that beauty has a deadline. You take one final look at yourself, not because you are vain, but because you understand that school is not just a place for lessons, it is a stage. Every hallway is a runway, every lunch table is a committee, and every glance from a boy can become a public document before the final bell rings. The first rule of high school dating was that a girl had to seem interested, but not too interested. This was a delicate operation, like carrying a bowl of tomato soup across a white carpet. If she acted cold, people said she was stuck up. If she acted warm, people said she was fast. If she spoke to too many boys, she was boy crazy. If she spoke to none, something was wrong with her. A boy could flirt clumsily and be called lively. A girl could laugh at the wrong joke and become a topic by 7th period. The balance was exhausting, and yet it had to look effortless. The ideal girl was supposed to be charming enough to attract attention, modest enough to deny she wanted it, and cheerful enough not to point out that the rules made about as much sense as putting tuna in gelatin and calling it a salad. Reputation was the invisible report card. Grades mattered, of course. So did club activities, church attendance, neat handwriting, and whether your gym uniform had survived the laundry without becoming a private tragedy. But reputation was something else. It followed a girl like a second shadow. It could be built from small things: a hemline, a rumour, a ride home, a whispered story at the lockers. A girl's reputation could be damaged by something she did, something someone said she did, or something someone imagined she might do if given enough time and a parked car. This was the cruel efficiency of teenage society. It did not require proof. It only required circulation. Parents knew this, and many of them treated dating as if it were a mild household emergency with lipstick. A boy who came to the house had to meet the family. He might stand awkwardly in the living room while your father lowered the newspaper just enough to inspect him. Your mother might offer a polite smile while silently calculating his manners, his shoes, his family, his haircut, and whether he looked like the sort of young man who understood curfew as a sacred national institution. The boy would say, "Good evening, sir," with the terrified politeness of someone entering a bank vault. You would stand nearby smiling as though your entire social future were not being weighed against the carpet. The telephone was its own theatre. Long before anyone could disappear into private messages, the family phone sat in a public part of the house, like a small black judge. If a boy called, the whole household knew. The ring itself could make your stomach jump. Your mother might answer first, using her company voice, the one she saved for ministers, school principals, and young men who needed to prove they had been raised indoors. Then she would cover the receiver and say your name in a tone that meant "do not sound too eager." You would take the phone and stretch the cord as far as it would go, maybe into the hallway, maybe around the corner, but never far enough from the possibility of being overheard. Every laugh had to be measured. Every pause had to be managed. Romance came with an audience, and the audience was folding laundry 10 feet away. Going out was rarely just going out. It had to be explained, approved, timed, and returned from in acceptable condition. A date might mean a movie, a school dance, a basketball game, a church youth event, a trip to the soda fountain, or sitting in a booth over one milkshake with 2 straws, an object that looked innocent, but carried enough symbolic weight to make several mothers nervous. The boy was expected to ask. The girl was expected to wait. He was supposed to lead but not push. She was supposed to respond but not chase. If he did not call again, she was supposed to seem unbothered. If he called too often, she was supposed to be careful. A teenage girl learned early that even happiness needed supervision. The double standard sat quietly inside nearly every rule. Boys were warned, but girls were watched. Boys were expected to have impulses. Girls were expected to manage not only their own behavior, but the possible behavior of boys around them. If a date went wrong, if gossip started, if a line was crossed, or even rumored to be crossed, the question often came back to the girl. What was she wearing? Why was she alone with him? Why did she stay out so late? Why did she let people talk? The burden of respectability was heavy because it was made to look like common sense. Adults called it protection. Sometimes it was. But it was also control tied with a ribbon and handed down as advice. At school, other girls could be both friends and inspectors. They helped with lipstick in the bathroom mirror. They passed notes, traded secrets, and analysed every phone call with the seriousness of military code breakers. But the same circle that comforted you could also measure you. Who got asked to the dance? Who had a steady boyfriend? Who wore his class ring on a chain around her neck with enough casual pride to power a small radio station? Who was still waiting? The rituals of dating created a ranking system no one admitted existed. A girl could say she did not care and still feel the little sting when another girl received a corsage, a ride home, or a mention in the yearbook beside a smiling boy with a confident part in his hair. And then there was the phrase "nice girl." It sounded harmless, almost sweet, but it carried a whole suitcase of expectations. A nice girl did not call boys first. A nice girl did not stay out too late. A nice girl did not seem too eager. A nice girl did not park too long. A nice girl did not let her name travel through the halls in the wrong tone of voice. Being a nice girl required constant emotional bookkeeping. You had to enjoy being noticed while pretending not to seek notice. You had to be pretty but not provocative friendly, but not familiar, innocent but not childish, ready for romance but somehow untouched by desire. It was a performance so complicated that one almost expected a school assembly explaining it with charts. Still, for many teenagers, there was real sweetness in it. There were Friday night games under cold lights, wool coats in the bleachers, boys buying popcorn, girls pretending not to be cold because shivering could ruin the effect. There were slow dances in decorated gyms, paper streamers overhead, the smell of floor wax and perfume, and the shy panic of someone's hand resting at your waist for the first time. There were notes tucked into lockers, songs on the radio that seemed written for one specific ache in your chest, and long evenings when a girl lay in bed replaying a conversation so carefully that one sentence could keep her awake until midnight. The world may have been strict, but feeling was still feeling. Young hearts did not become less real because adults had rules about them. The tragedy, or maybe just the sadness, was that teenage dating often taught girls to see themselves through other people's reactions. Did he call? Did he ask? Did his friends know? Did your friends approve? Did your parents seem relieved or concerned? A girl's sense of possibility could become tied to whether she was chosen publicly enough to be safe from questions. The marriage deadline at 25 did not appear out of nowhere. It began here in hallways and living rooms with the first lessons in being wanted properly. High school dating trained girls to understand that romance was not only private emotion, it was social proof. So as the final bell rings and you walk down the steps with your books held against your chest, you're carrying more than homework. You're carrying the first version of the marriage clock. It is still soft, still far away, hidden under the sound of laughter and lockers slamming shut. But it is there. It ticks when a boy smiles at you. It ticks when your mother asks who called. It ticks when someone says a girl has to be careful. And by the time prom season begins with its corsages borrowed, cars, nervous mothers and gymnasiums transformed into paper kingdoms, that little clock will grow just a bit louder. Prom night. In 1950s, America was not just a dance. It was a soft-lit rehearsal for being selected in public. The gymnasium might smell like floor wax crepe paper perfume, and nervous boys wearing rented jackets that did not quite understand their shoulders. The decorations might be made from paper stars, painted cardboard moons, and the exhausted imagination of the decorating committee. But beneath the music and the punch bowl, beneath the photographs and the careful smiles, there was a little ceremony taking place. Who had been asked? Who had not? Who arrived in a car? Who came in a group? Who wore a corsage on her wrist like proof that someone had chosen her before everyone else could wonder why. Imagine yourself standing in your bedroom on prom night, the whole house holding its breath around you. Your dress is hanging on the closet door, pale blue or pink or white with tulle that makes it look as if a small cloud has agreed to become clothing. Your mother has already checked the hem twice. Your father has walked past the doorway 3 times pretending to look for something, though what he is really looking for is proof that his little girl has not grown up too quickly. On the vanity there is lipstick, face powder, a small bottle of perfume and a pair of gloves waiting like tiny supervisors. You are excited, of course. You are also terrified. Because tonight is supposed to be magical. And magic in the 1950s required a great deal of ironing. The first drama of prom was whether you were asked at all. That question could hover over a girl for weeks. It appeared in hallway whispers, lunchroom glances, and the sudden hush when someone entered the room. Has anyone asked you, yet sounded casual, but everyone knew it was not casual. It was a status report. A girl could pretend not to care. She could say she might go with friends, or that prom was silly anyway, or that she was too busy helping with decorations. But underneath the brave little shrug was the uncomfortable truth that school dances often turned private longing into public inventory. A boy's invitation was not just an invitation. It was evidence. It told everyone that you were desirable enough, popular enough, properly feminine enough, or at least socially safe enough to be escorted under paper streamers while the chaperones watched from folding chairs. The asking itself could become a tiny community event. Maybe he called your house voice cracking slightly as your mother stood 10 feet away pretending to polish a dish that had been dry since lunch. Maybe he asked by your locker trying to sound casual while 3 of his friends loitered nearby with the emotional maturity of parked bicycles. Maybe he passed a note or waited after class or offered to walk you home and then spent 6 blocks building up the courage to say the sentence. And you, trained by years of careful girlhood instruction, had to respond just right. Not too eager, not too cold. A smile, a pause, a little surprise even if you had been hoping for this exact moment, with the concentration of a radio operator receiving wartime signals. Once the date was secured, the planning began. The dress had to flatter but not announce itself too loudly. The shoes had to match and also survive several hours of dancing, walking, standing, and possibly fleeing to the restroom with your best friend to analyze the meaning of one sentence. Your hair had to be set, sprayed, pinned, and persuaded into place, with enough determination to withstand weather dancing and emotional disappointment. Then came the corsage, that small floral badge of courtship. Orchids, carnations, roses, whatever his family or the florist decided was appropriate. He would arrive holding it in a little box, and for a moment everyone would gather as if witnessing a treaty being signed. Your mother would say how lovely it was. Your father would clear his throat. You would hold out your wrist, and the boy would fasten it with hands that suddenly seemed to have forgotten their training as hands. There was a strange intimacy in the corsage ritual, and everyone pretended not to notice it. He had to touch your wrist. You had to stand still. Your mother might smile brightly enough to power the porch light. Someone would say, "Let's get a picture," and then there you were, frozen forever in black and white, standing beside a boy whose hair was slicked down with enough product to survive a small weather event. In the photograph, you look like a young couple. That was the point. Prom turned teenagers into a preview of respectable adulthood. The dress, the flowers, the suit, the car, the front door photograph, the curfew, the dance floor. It was romance wrapped in parental approval, which is perhaps the most 1950s invention imaginable. At the school, the gymnasium had been transformed, or at least it had made a sincere effort. Basketball hoops disappeared behind decorations. Streamers sagged gently from the ceiling. A folding table held punch cookies and the kind of mints that tasted faintly like chalk with ambition. Teachers stood along the walls in their chaperone posture, smiling with the watchful patience of people who'd seen enough teenage behavior to trust no one completely. The band played something slow, then something lively, then something slow again, because even music had to obey the rules of emotional pacing. Couples drifted onto the floor. Girls adjusted skirts. Boys adjusted ties. Everyone pretended dancing was easy, though half the room looked as if it was trying to move furniture politely. For a girl, the dance floor was another test of balance. You wanted to seem graceful, happy, and grateful to be there. You wanted your date to enjoy himself but not think you were trying too hard. You wanted other girls to see that you had been chosen, but not that you were proud of it. You wanted your parents to hear later that everything had gone well, which meant nothing scandalous, nothing embarrassing, and no unexplained delay in coming home. The slow dance was especially delicate. Too close and people noticed. Too far and people noticed differently. A girl could spend half a song calculating the proper distance between innocence and affection, while a boy named Don or Billy tried not to step on her shoe. The photographs mattered too. Prom photographs were not merely memories. They were social documents placed in albums mailed to relatives, sometimes displayed in living rooms, where visitors could interpret them over coffee. A girl in a prom dress looked like a promise. Not a bride yet, but moving in the correct direction. The whole evening whispered that someday there would be another dress, another bouquet, another photograph at the front door, only this time the boy would be a husband and everyone would stop wondering. That was why prom carried so much weight. It trained young women to see public pairing as progress, to stand beside someone, to be admired beside someone, to become for one evening half of a picture that made sense to other people. But not every girl had that experience. Some waited and were not asked. Some went with friends and laughed too loudly to cover the ache. Some accepted invitations from boys they did not especially like, because going with someone seemed easier than explaining no one. Some were excluded by race, class, disability, religion, family rules, shyness, or the cold machinery of teenage popularity. Some girls could not afford the dress. Some parents did not allow the dance. Some schools and communities enforced lines of belonging that decided who could be seen, celebrated, protected, or paired. The nostalgic photograph of prom night often leaves these girls just outside the frame, but they were there too, listening to the same music from a different corner of the story. And even for the girl with the dress, the flowers, and the date, the night could feel heavier than expected. Maybe the boy was kind but dull. Maybe he barely spoke. Maybe he danced with someone else for one song too many. Maybe he tried to act older than he was, which usually meant becoming suddenly ridiculous. Maybe you looked around the room and felt the first sharp lesson that being chosen did not always mean being understood. A corsage could prove that someone wanted to bring you to the dance. It could not prove that he knew what made you laugh, what frightened you, what dreams you kept hidden under the pillow with your diary and a movie star clipping. Still, when the evening ended, you returned home with tired feet, wilted flowers, and a mind full of small moments to be examined in bed. Did he have a good time? Would he call again? Did anyone see you laughing near the punch table? Did your mother notice the smudge on your lipstick? You placed the corsage carefully somewhere to dry, as if preserving evidence from a trial where the verdict had not yet been announced. In the morning, people would ask how it went. You would say it was nice. Nice was a safe word. Nice could hold almost anything. Prom night was a rehearsal, but not only for marriage. It was a rehearsal for the larger performance expected of many women in the 1950s, to be wanted to be modest about being wanted to be grateful for attention, to manage appearances, and to understand that romance was rarely just between two people. It belonged to parents, classmates, neighbours, yearbooks, photographs, and the invisible committee of public opinion. The corsage faded after a few days. The music stopped. The gym returned to basketball and morning assemblies. But the lesson remained. A girl had been asked, escorted, photographed, and watched. She had practiced being chosen. And somewhere beyond the next school year, beyond the next dance, beyond the next boy waiting awkwardly by the front door, the marriage clock was still learning how to tick a little louder. College. For many young women in 1950s, America was advertised as a place of books, friendships, polished shoes, and bright futures. But in certain hallways, dormitories, sorority houses, and campus cafeterias, another curriculum moved quietly underneath the official one. It was not printed in the course catalogue. No professor wrote it on the blackboard. But everyone seemed to know the phrase, or at least the feeling behind it. Ring by spring. A little joke, a little wish, a little warning wrapped in campus laughter. It meant that before the school year ended, a girl might hope to have a diamond on her finger, or at least a serious boy attached to her future like a well-pressed footnote. She could study literature, history, typing, biology, or education, but somewhere between the library and the dining hall there was another question being asked. Would she graduate with a degree, or with a husband, or with both if the schedule behaved itself? Imagine yourself arriving on a college campus in the autumn of 1956 carrying a suitcase, a cardigan, and the nervous excitement of someone stepping into a wider world. The trees are beginning to turn. The dormitory smells of floor polish, wool coats, cold cream, and someone's mother's perfume still lingering from goodbye hugs. There are girls laughing in the hallway, pinning schedules to bulletin boards, comparing hometowns, unpacking framed photographs and little alarm clocks. For a moment, college feels like freedom. You have your own desk, your own bed, your own small corner of the world, even if it comes with a roommate who hums while brushing her hair and borrows your bobby pins as if they are a public utility. You feel grown up. You feel nearly independent. Then someone down the hall mentions a mixer with the men's college nearby, and suddenly freedom puts on lipstick. The campus world could be full of promise. Many women pursued real education with seriousness and intelligence. Some were preparing to become teachers, nurses, librarians, social workers, writers, scientists, or professionals, in fields that did not always make room for them easily. They read, wrote papers, took exams, joined clubs, edited newsletters, performed in plays, debated ideas, and discovered parts of themselves that did not fit neatly into a hope chest. But the social atmosphere often reminded them that education and marriage were not always treated as separate ambitions. In many circles, college was understood as a respectable place to meet a respectable husband. It was higher learning, yes, but also higher matchmaking with better stationery and more Latin mottos. The phrase MRS degree floated through the air with a wink. It sounded playful, as if everyone were clever enough to laugh at it. But jokes are sometimes the softest way a culture tells the truth. A girl could laugh along and still feel the weight of it. If she studied too hard, someone might say she was hiding from romance. If she dated too much, someone might say she was not serious about school. If she wanted both achievement and love, she had to arrange them carefully, like cups on a tea tray during an earthquake. She was expected to be bright but not intimidating, ambitious but not mannish, well-read but still willing to listen, while a young man explained a subject she had just earned an A in. Nothing says romance quite like nodding politely through your own expertise. Campus mixers were little laboratories of social expectation. The girls dressed carefully, not as if they were trying too hard, though, of course, everyone was trying hard enough to require structural support from hairspray. The boys arrived in jackets, ties, and clouds of aftershave, carrying the confidence of people who'd been told the world was waiting for them to lead it. Music played. Punch was served. Everyone stood in small groups, pretending conversation happened naturally between strangers who were silently assessing one another for marriage potential. A girl learned to ask about his major, his hometown, his plans after graduation, whether he had served in the military, whether he wanted children someday, though not too directly, because apparently the future had to be hunted with a butterfly net. If a boy pinned his fraternity pin on a girl or gave her his class ring to wear on a chain, the meaning could ripple through campus faster than a cafeteria rumor about bad meatloaf. These tokens were not quite engagement rings, but they were social signals, proof of seriousness, evidence that a girl was not merely dating but moving towards something that could be explained to parents, roommates, and the older aunt who wrote letters asking if there were any nice boys at school. Wearing a ring around your neck could feel romantic, but it could also feel like having a small metal announcement resting over your heart. You belonged to a story now. People knew how to talk about you. The quiet countdown often became loudest in senior year. Freshman girls were allowed to be uncertain. Sophomores could still be exploring. Juniors were watched with interest. But seniors, especially in communities where marriage soon after college was admired, could feel the calendar closing in. Engagements bloomed across campus like spring flowers, only with more nervous mothers and department store china patterns. Bulletin boards carried announcements. Sorority houses buzzed with news. One girl had a diamond, another had a June date, another was leaving before graduation because the wedding could not possibly wait, as if matrimony were a train and the conductor was shouting last call from the chapel. Everyone congratulated them. Everyone meant it. And still every congratulations could land differently on the girl whose hand remained bare. There was a particular sound to the dining hall during engagement season. Silverware clinked. Coffee cups touched saucers. Girls leaned close to admire rings, asking how he proposed what his parents said, whether the wedding would be at home or in the college chapel. The engaged girl held out her hand with a mixture of pride, embarrassment, and relief. Relief was rarely named, but it was there. She had been chosen. The question mark had been erased, at least for now. Her future had a title: fiancée, soon wife. The culture understood those words. They were safe words, respectable words, words that made adults smile into their napkins. For the girl without a ring, the season could feel strangely lonely even in a crowded room. She might be happy for her friends and still feel herself being left behind by a parade she had not realized she was marching in. Her roommate's side of the room might fill with bridal magazines, fabric swatches, letters from home, and breathless discussions about guest lists. Meanwhile, her own desk held textbooks, a half-finished paper, and a small private worry that perhaps education had given her more thoughts than society knew what to do with. She might love college. She might love the library, the late-night talks, the feeling of becoming larger inside her own mind. But outside that inward expansion, the old question waited politely in the hall. "That is wonderful, dear, but have you met anyone?" Parents sometimes added their own gentle pressure from afar. Letters arrived with news from home. Cousin Margaret was engaged. The neighbour's daughter had set a date. A friend from church married a very promising young man who worked in banking and had excellent posture. Your mother might write that she hoped you were not spending all your time studying. Your father might add a note about keeping your standards high, but not impossible, which is a sentence so carefully useless it deserves its own diploma. Visits home could become interviews. Did you meet anyone nice? Are the boys there serious? You're not getting too particular, are you? Family concern travelled through the mail with stamps, affection, and a surprising ability to make a dorm room feel small. There were also women who saw college as a doorway to something beyond marriage, and they mattered. Some wanted graduate school, some wanted careers, some wanted to teach travel right research or simply delay the life everyone had prepared for them. But delay was often treated as risky. A girl who waited might be told she was wasting her best years as if youth were a carton of milk, and the date on the top was visible to the whole neighbourhood. The fear was not always shouted. It could be quiet, even kindly expressed. But the message remained. Do not become so educated that men are frightened. Do not become so independent that you forget how to need someone. Do not become so comfortable alone that others begin calling it a problem. And yet campus life gave many young women something precious, even if the culture tried to fold it back toward marriage. It gave them friendships, books, ideas, laughter, independence, and glimpses of possible selves. A girl might sit under a tree with a novel and feel for 1 hour that her life was not a race toward anyone's approval. She might walk back from class in the cool evening air, hearing music from a dorm window, and imagine a future wider than the one described in bridal magazines. Then the bell tower would ring, or someone would call out news of another engagement, and the old rhythm returned. Books by day, mixers by night. A mind opening in one direction while society pointed firmly in another, so the quiet countdown continued. It was not the same for every woman, and it was never the whole story. Some married happily after meeting someone at college. Some married because the path was smooth and everyone applauded. Some stepped away from school to become wives and later wondered what else they might have done. Some finished their degrees, put on white gloves for graduation, and still felt more questions than answers waiting beyond the ceremony. But for many, college carried a strange double promise. It said become educated. It also whispered become chosen. And as spring approached with dogwood blossoms, final exams, and diamond rings flashing in dining halls, a young woman could feel both futures moving toward her at once, wondering which one would arrive first. The office girl in 1950s America occupied a curious little corner of the social imagination. She was admired for being neat, useful, cheerful, and quick with a typewriter. She could answer telephones, file letters, take dictation, smile at visitors, and somehow know where every misplaced document had gone, which made her almost mystical in a building full of men who could not find their own carbon paper. But she was not always expected to stay. That was the important part. The office was often treated as a place a young woman passed through on her way to marriage, like a waiting room with fluorescent light cigarette smoke, and a boss who called everyone honey, because apparently first names were too modern and last names were too respectful. Imagine yourself stepping into an office building on a cold Monday morning in 1958. The sidewalk is damp. Your gloves are buttoned. Your shoes make a careful little sound against the lobby floor. You ride the elevator with men in dark suits, women in wool skirts, and the faint smell of aftershave perfume paper and ambition. In your handbag there is lipstick, a compact mirror, a folded handkerchief, a little notebook, and perhaps a letter from your mother asking if you have met anyone nice. You're going to work, yes. You earn a paycheck. You have a desk. You know how to operate the switchboard, change a typewriter ribbon, correct a letter, without making the boss look foolish, and tell from one cough in the hallway whether Mr. Henderson is about to ask where the quarterly reports are. You are capable. You are necessary. And still everyone speaks as if your real future is somewhere else. The office itself has a rhythm. Typewriters clatter like mechanical rain. Phones ring with the confidence of things that expect women to answer them. Filing cabinets open and close. Cigarettes burn in ashtrays beside coffee cups because the mid-century office believed fresh air was a rumour started by radicals. Men move from meeting to meeting with folders under their arms, while secretaries keep the machinery of the place from collapsing into expensive confusion. You type letters, schedule appointments, remember birthdays, soothe irritated clients, and translate vague mail instructions into actual work. A man might say, "Send that thing to the fellow about the account," and somehow you're expected to know which thing, which fellow, and which account, and most of the time you do. For many young unmarried women, office work offered a taste of independence. A paycheck meant lipstick bought with your own money, lunch out with the girls, a bus pass, a dress from the department store chosen without asking your father if it was practical. There was pleasure in competence, in being good at something the household did not automatically claim. You had colleagues, a routine, a place to go in the morning, a reason to wear a smart blouse and walk quickly through downtown as if the day had business with you personally. In a world that often measured women by marriage, office work gave some women a brief but real sense of self outside the family living room. But the office girl was not supposed to become too attached to that self. That was the hidden rule. Work was acceptable before marriage, sometimes even encouraged, as long as it was understood to be temporary. A young woman could be a secretary, receptionist, clerk, typist, bookkeeper, salesgirl, or stenographer, while she waited for the larger event of her life to begin. The job gave her polished discipline and contact with respectable men, which some people considered part of the point. But if she remained year after year, if she became too skilled, too independent, too comfortable at her desk, the atmosphere changed. People began to ask different questions. Not how is the job going, but are you still there? Still typing? Still working? Still not married? The word still could make even a paycheck feel suspicious. At lunch, the other girls gathered in a small restaurant or office break room, unwrapping sandwiches, lighting cigarettes, comparing nylons, and discussing the latest engagements as if reading dispatches from the front. One girl had accepted a proposal from a salesman with a new car. Another was leaving at the end of the month because the wedding was in June, and her fiancé did not see why she should keep working afterward. Everyone congratulated her. There might be cake. There might be a small gift from the office, perhaps a toaster, because nothing said best wishes like a future of slightly browned bread. The men joked that they were losing a good girl, but they said it with the relaxed confidence of people who assumed another good girl would arrive to take her chair. The empty desk did not stay empty for long. A new young woman appeared fresh from business school or high school wearing careful lipstick and the expression of someone determined not to make mistakes. The cycle repeated. Girls came in, learned the system, kept the office running, fell in love, or were expected to got engaged and left. The office absorbed them and released them like a machine designed for temporary daughters. If one stayed, she became noticeable. At first she was experienced, then dependable, then perhaps a little too settled. The same qualities that made her valuable at work could become social evidence against her. Efficient, organized, serious, good with money, knows what she wants, lovely traits in a secretary, slightly alarming traits according to some people in a woman who was supposed to be waiting gently for a husband to take the lead. Bosses had their own assumptions. Many expected young women to be pleasant, attractive, and uncomplaining. A secretary could know more about the office than half the executives, but she was rarely expected to rise very far. She might train men who would later outrank her. She might correct their spelling, organize their schedules, and save them from professional embarrassment, only to be asked to fetch coffee as if the typewriter had come with an apron. If she was ambitious, she had to hide it carefully. Too much ambition could make people uncomfortable. A woman who wanted advancement might be called sharp, difficult, unfeminine, or one of those career girls, a phrase spoken with the same tone some people use for suspicious leftovers in the back of the refrigerator. And then came the office romance question. Workplaces placed young women near men, but the rules remained tangled. A girl could meet a husband at work, and if she did, people might treat the job as having served its true purpose. The office becomes a matchmaking setting, the typewriter a supporting character, the payroll department accidentally romantic. But she also had to guard her reputation. Lunch with a male colleague could start whispers. Staying late could be misread. Laughing too warmly at a joke could become a story by Friday. Men could flirt and be considered charming. Women had to calculate whether responding would make them rude, cold, desperate, or foolish. The office was public enough to offer safety and private enough to create rumours, which made it one of society's more exhausting inventions. For the unmarried woman approaching 25, the office could become both shelter and evidence. It sheltered her because it gave structure to her day. She could say, "I have work," and that sentence had dignity. She was not simply sitting at home waiting for the phone to ring. She was busy. She was useful. She was earning. But the same job could be used to explain her singleness. Perhaps she works too much. Perhaps she likes being independent. Perhaps men are intimidated. Perhaps she's become too accustomed to taking care of herself. People said these things as if self-sufficiency were a stain that could be removed with the right husband and a cheerful June wedding. Picture her at her desk near the end of the day. The office has begun to quiet. The typewriter's slow. Men put on hats and head home to wives who will ask about dinner school forms and leaking faucets. The younger secretaries are talking about Friday plans. One has a date. One hopes for a call. One is pretending she does not care whether a certain man from accounting notices her new sweater. You place the cover over your typewriter and straighten the papers on your desk. You are good at this job, maybe better than anyone admits. The satisfaction should feel simple. But nothing is simple when a woman's life is being measured against a calendar no one has officially shown her. On the bus ride home, you look out the window at department store displays glowing in the evening. Mannequins wear dresses for wives, suits for husbands, tiny coats for children, and wedding gowns posed under soft lights like promises made of satin. You're tired but not unhappy. Or perhaps you are unhappy but not in the way people assume. You do not hate working. You do not hate being single. You hate being treated as if both conditions require explanation. You hate the way people look at your paycheck as temporary and your loneliness as certain. You hate that independence feels wonderful in the morning and suspicious by supper. At home, someone may ask about your day, and then sooner or later about your prospects. Work stories are tolerated, but romance stories are preferred. A difficult client cannot compete with a possible husband. A raise cannot compete with a ring. You might mention that Mr. Harris praised your work on the quarterly letters, and your mother might smile before asking whether that nice young man from church has called. The world listens politely to what you do, then leans forward, for who might choose you? That was the quiet ache of the office girl who stayed too long. She could build a life of competence, routine friendship and pride, but if no husband appeared, society still described her as waiting, and yet there is something quietly powerful about her. She rises early, she dresses carefully, she rides the bus through rain, heat and other people's perfume. She answers the telephone with a calm voice, keeps files in order, knows the office secrets, pays for her own stockings, and carries herself through a world that cannot decide whether to admire her or worry about her. She may eventually marry, she may not. She may leave the office for a nursery, a kitchen, another city, another job, or a future nobody around her has imagined properly. But for now, as the elevator doors close and the city lights tremble in the windows, she remains in that in-between place. Not a girl at home, not a wife in a house. An office woman with a desk, a paycheck and a clock somewhere nearby ticking softly beneath the sound of typewriter keys. Family dinner in 1950s. America could look peaceful from the doorway. The table was set, the glasses caught the kitchen light and the roast sat in the centre, like a proud little monument to domestic order. There might be mashed potatoes, canned peas, sliced bread, a dish of pickles and some kind of moulded salad that trembled with the confidence of a dessert pretending to be a vegetable. Everyone had a place. Father at the head of the table, mother moving between kitchen and chair, somehow both present and still working. Children trying not to spill milk, and then somewhere between the passing of the gravy and the first mention of church news came the question every unmarried daughter learned to expect. So are you seeing anyone? It did not always sound dangerous. That was part of its power. Sometimes it came warmly, almost teasingly, from a mother who only wanted to know whether there was a young man in the picture. Sometimes it came from a father who kept his eyes on his plate as if asking about your romantic future were no more serious than asking for salt. Sometimes it came from an aunt and uncle, a grandmother, or a visiting neighbour who had no official right to the information, but came from a generation that believed a young woman's marriage prospects were community property. The question could arrive dressed in many outfits, any nice boys at work. Did that fellow from church ever call? You went to the dance, didn't you? Whatever happened to Bill? You're not getting too choosy, are you? Different words, same fork hovering over the same potato. Imagine yourself sitting at that table 24 years old wearing a neat dress after a long day at the office, trying to eat politely while feeling the room lean toward you. Your mother has made meatloaf because meatloaf was economical, respectable, and emotionally available in a way people sometimes were not. Your father has loosened his tie. Your younger brother is making a quiet architectural project out of mashed potatoes. You are tired. You have answered telephones all day, typed letters for men who forgot your name, and smiled at a bus driver who called you miss, as if the word were a temporary condition. All you want is dinner. But the family has reached the part of the evening where concern puts on an apron and joins the meal. Your mother begins gently. I saw Mrs. Patterson at the market today. This is never just news. Mrs. Patterson is not a person now. She is a doorway. Her daughter Joan is engaged. There it is. The first course of comparison served hot. You say that is nice. And it is nice. Joan is perfectly pleasant, and you do not wish her anything bad except perhaps a slightly shorter bridal shower. Your mother nods, watching your face. She's only 22, you know. You take a sip of water. Your father clears his throat in the background, which is his way of contributing punctuation. Then your mother says it, softly, carefully. Have you heard from that young man from the insurance office? This is how family dinners became interviews without anyone admitting there was an interview. The questions came between ordinary things hidden inside updates and compliments. Your parents might ask because they loved you. They might worry about your security, your reputation, your loneliness, or their own fear of not knowing what life would look like for a daughter who did not follow the expected path. In many homes, marriage was not seen as one option among many. It was the shape of a stable future. A husband meant protection, respectability, a household, children, a place in the social order. It meant your parents could stop wondering and start telling people at church that everything was settled. Settlement was a very important word, even if no one used it out loud. The trouble was that the daughter at the table was not a household problem to be solved. She was a person. She might have liked someone who did not like her back. She might have disliked the men everyone praised as sensible. She might have wanted more time. She might have wanted marriage very badly and felt humiliated by the reminder that it had not arrived. She might have been quietly relieved to be single, though that was perhaps the most difficult truth to serve beside meatloaf. In a culture where women were often trained to be chosen not choosing could look like failure, rebellion, sadness, or confusion depending on who was doing the looking. Every family had its own style of pressure. Some were direct. You can't wait forever. Good men don't stay available. You should be thinking seriously now. Others were softer, almost elegant in their ability to make anxiety sound like table conversation. You looked so pretty at Elaine's wedding. That blue dress brings out your eyes. A girl should enjoy her youth while she has it. There were mothers who clipped advice columns, aunts who recommended lipstick shades, fathers who suggested that a certain young man had a steady job, as if a steady job were a personality. There were grandmothers who had married young and could not understand why anyone would take longer than necessary to begin being tired. And then came the stories. Family dinners loved stories about other people's daughters. The girl who waited too long, the cousin who married well, the neighbour who became a teacher and never married, always described with a small sigh, even if she owned a car, read novels, and seemed suspiciously peaceful. The office woman downtown who was very capable but lived alone. The older lady at church who played the organ and was admired for her service, though everyone lowered their voices when discussing her personal life. These stories were not always cruel. Sometimes they were cautionary tales told by people who thought they were helping. but they taught a young woman to imagine her future as something other people might narrate over dinner if she failed to provide a better ending. The phrase "nice young man" became one of the great family dinner weapons of the decade. It sounded harmless. Who could object to niceness? But in practice, it could mean almost anything. A nice young man had a job, came from a decent family, attended church, often enough to be identified by older women, and did not appear in police reports or motorcycle jackets. He might be dull as unbuttered toast, but dullness could be mistaken for reliability if served on the right china. Your mother might say, "He seems like a nice young man," and what she meant was, please do not dismiss him just because your soul failed to catch fire during a conversation about office supplies. Sometimes you try to answer honestly. You said you had not met anyone special. You said you were busy. You said the men at work were either married, engaged, too young, too old, or so boring that even their pencils looked tired. Your mother smiled, but the smile had worry tucked behind it. Your father might say, "Well, nobody is perfect." That sentence could hang over the table like a moral lesson and a threat. Nobody is perfect meant lower your standards, dear. It meant do not confuse ordinary disappointment with a reason to remain unmarried. It meant marriage was not about finding a dream, but about stepping onto the path before the path became overgrown. But beneath the comedy there was real fear. Parents of the 1950s often lived with memories of depression, war scarcity, and instability. They knew how hard the world could be. For daughters especially, financial independence was often limited by unequal, pay-restricted opportunities and social expectations that treated long-term work as unfeminine or temporary. A mother might push marriage not because she wanted to reduce her daughter, but because she feared what would happen if her daughter had to stand alone in a world not designed to make that easy. Her pressure could be loving and unfair at the same time. That is one of history's quietest complications. People can hurt you with the very tools they were given to protect you. So the dinner table became a place where affection and expectation sat side by side. Your mother passed the peas and worried about your future. Your father sliced the meatloaf and imagined handing you to a decent man who would keep the roof repaired and the bills paid. Your siblings listened, learning early that adulthood for a girl involved questions everyone felt allowed to ask. You smiled, answered lightly, and tried not to show how tired you were of defending a life that was still unfolding. The question, "Are you seeing anyone?" was never only about a date. It was about whether your life was on schedule, whether your family could relax, whether the story made sense. After dinner you helped clear the plates because daughters were expected to process their own interrogation and rinse the gravy boat. In the kitchen, your mother might stand beside you at the sink, quieter now, hands deep in warm, soapy water. She might say, "I only want you to be happy." And there it was, the sentence that softened everything and solved nothing. Because she did want that. She wanted happiness for you. But she'd been taught to recognize happiness in certain shapes. A ring, a husband, a home, a baby carriage on the porch. She did not always know how to imagine a happiness that came without those things, or came later, or came differently. You dried the plates and looked through the dark window above the sink. Your reflection floated there, layered over the night outside. Young but not young enough for people to stop asking. Capable but not settled enough for them to stop worrying. Loved but measured. The house behind you was warm. The dishes were clean. The family meant well. And still the question had found its way into the room again, as it always did. Not shouted, not written. Just spoken gently over supper, then left behind like a small stain on the tablecloth. Tomorrow there would be work errands, phone calls, maybe a movie, maybe a church social, maybe another nice young man mentioned by someone with hopeful eyes. And somewhere inside all of it, the same question would wait for the next meal. Advice in 1950s. America did not always arrive like advice. Sometimes it arrived as a compliment, a warning, a recipe, a lipstick suggestion, or a story about another girl who'd waited just a little too long. Mothers and aunts rarely needed to say, "Find a husband before the world stops clapping." That would have sounded unkind, and besides, unkindness was supposed to wear gloves in polite families. Instead, the advice came softly. Wear the blue dress. Smile more. Do not talk about work too much. Let him feel clever. Do not seem too eager. Do not seem too distant. A young woman could spend an entire afternoon being prepared for marriage without anyone admitting there had been a lesson. Picture yourself in your mother's kitchen on a Saturday morning, sunlight falling through the curtains while the coffee percolates and the ironing board stands open like a domestic altar. Your mother is pressing a blouse, moving the iron with practiced little strokes, while your aunt sits at the table with a cigarette, a cup of coffee, and the expression of a woman who has seen enough courtship to consider herself a military advisor. You've only mentioned that you might go to a movie with the young man from church. Might. A small word. Harmless word. But in this kitchen it lands like breaking news. Your mother pauses over the collar. Your aunt leans forward. Suddenly your Saturday has become a briefing. The first advice is about appearance, because appearance was considered the front porch of a woman's future. Your mother says the blue dress would be nice, but not the tight one, the other blue dress, the one that says pretty but not trying too hard. Your aunt agrees and adds that pearls are always safe because apparently pearls possess the power to calm nervous men and reassure suspicious mothers. Lipstick should be fresh but not too bright. Hair should be neat but not severe. Shoes should be clean. Stockings should have no runs. A girl was expected to look desirable enough to attract attention, respectable enough to survive it, and effortless enough to hide the small army of pins, powder, and panic holding the whole performance together. Then came advice about conversation. Ask about his work. Laugh if he tells a joke, but not too loudly. Do not correct him in public unless it is something terribly important, and even then perhaps wait until later, which usually meant never. If you have read an interesting book, mention it gently. Do not sound like you're giving a lecture. Men like smart girls, your aunt says, but not girls who make them feel stupid. Everyone nods at this as if it is wisdom, and not a tragic little warning label attached to half the female population. You sit at the table and wonder whether men are so delicate that one vocabulary word might send them fleeing into the night. Your mother's advice is gentler. She tells you to be yourself, then immediately begins editing the version of yourself she thinks should attend the movie. Be kind. Be pleasant. Do not order anything messy. Thank him if he pays. Let him open the door. Be home on time. Do not let people talk. That last sentence is the true centerpiece placed quietly between manners and curfew. Do not let people talk. It means behave well, but it also means understand that people may talk anyway. It means your reputation is a fragile dish, and even if someone else knocks it from the table, you may still be blamed for the crack. Mothers knew this. Aunts knew it too. Many of them had lived under the same watchful ceiling, and their advice carried the weary practicality of women who had learned where the floorboards creaked. Aunts had a special talent for turning concern into small stories. They told you about a girl from the next town who'd been too particular and was now living with her parents, teaching school and playing piano for church, as if this were not a life but a cautionary exhibit. They mentioned a cousin who turned down a perfectly good man because he was dull, only to discover that dull men sometimes owned houses. They spoke of another woman who married late, and had trouble adjusting whatever that meant, though it was said with a sigh heavy enough to bend the wallpaper. These stories were never told as threats. They were presented like weather reports from the future. Cloud cover increasing. Best carry an umbrella and accept dinner with the insurance fellow. The advice could be funny if you were not the one receiving it. Do not chase him, but do not let him get away. Let him know you are interested, but never let him know too much. Be independent, but not so independent he cannot imagine helping you. Be pretty, but not vain. Be modest, but not dull. Be lively, but not wild. Be agreeable, but not foolish. It was a recipe with no measurements passed down by women who'd been told to bake the same impossible cake. If it collapsed, someone would say you opened the oven too soon. Beneath the comedy was panic, and beneath the panic was love mixed with fear. Many mothers and aunts were not trying to trap their daughters and nieces in small lives. They were trying to guide them through the world they knew. They'd seen how quickly people judged an unmarried woman. They knew that a woman's options could narrow with age, income gossip, and family circumstance. They knew that security often came through marriage, not because women lacked ability, but because society had built too many doors that opened more easily for wives than for single women. So their advice came from a place both tender and confined. They wanted you safe. They wanted you respected. They wanted you wanted. And in their minds, these things were tied together so tightly that pulling one thread seemed to endanger the whole sweater. There was also advice about not frightening men with sadness. If you were lonely, do not show it too soon. If you were ambitious, soften it. If you were angry, call it tired. If you wanted marriage, pretend you were merely open to it. If you did not want marriage, yet smile as if you simply had not met the right person. A woman's emotions had to pass through a little customs office before entering public view. Too much longing looked desperate. Too much confidence looked proud. Too much honesty looked unladylike. Mothers taught daughters how to translate themselves into acceptable language, sometimes because they believed in the rules, sometimes because they feared what would happen if their daughters broke them too loudly. And then there was the physical choreography of courtship. Sit with your knees together. Keep your gloves clean. Do not smoke unless he already knows you smoke, and even then maybe do not. Never let a date think you are the kind of girl who has no curfew. Never leave a party without telling someone. Do not get into a car with a boy who's been drinking. Do not park too long where people might see you. Do not park too long where people might not see you. The rules contradicted themselves with the confidence of a department store elevator operator. Be visible enough to be protected, invisible enough not to be judged, close enough to be romantic, distant enough to remain respectable. It is a wonder any young woman made it through a date without needing a map and a legal advisor. Sometimes the advice happened in bedrooms, not kitchens. Your mother might sit on the edge of the bed while you got ready, smoothing the skirt of your dress, telling you that men appreciated a girl who made them feel at ease. Your aunt might stand behind you at the mirror adjusting your necklace, saying that a woman must know when to let a man think an idea was his. You might laugh because it sounded silly, because you were young, because the night still felt full of possibility. But a part of you stored every sentence. You learned that romance was not simply feeling. It was strategy. It was timing. It was performance. It was walking into an evening already carrying generations of other women's caution in your handbag. Not every mother gave the same advice. Some encouraged their daughters to study, work, travel, wait, and choose carefully. Some had unhappy marriages and quietly hoped their daughters would not rush into the same kind of loneliness with better china. Some said very little because they did not know how to speak across the distance between their own youth and the new world opening after the war. Some daughters heard advice as comfort. Others heard it as pressure. Most heard both. That is what makes these scenes so human. A mother could love her daughter deeply and still pass along a rule that made her daughter feel smaller. An aunt could be ridiculous and wise in the same sentence. A family could be trying to help while also tightening the invisible deadline. By the time you left the house for the movie, the date, the church, social, or the dance, you were never going alone. You carried your mother's hopes, your aunt's warnings, your grandmother's sighs, your cousin's engagement announcement, and the story of the girl from the next town who waited too long and apparently doomed herself to a life of perfectly respectable piano music. You stepped into the evening smiling, powdered, polished, and slightly over-instructed. The young man at the door saw a pretty girl in a blue dress. He did not see the committee of female ancestors and living relatives quietly seated behind your eyes taking notes. And maybe that is why the marriage deadline felt so powerful. It did not come only from men, magazines, churches, schools, or neighbours. It also came through women who had survived the same world and were trying in their own imperfect way to teach survival. Their advice was a lullaby and an alarm bell. It said, be careful. It said, be charming. It said, do not waste time. It said, choose well, but not too slowly. And as the porch light glowed and the young man held the car door open, you stepped forward into the night, hearing every soft warning follow you down the path. Sunday morning had a way of making everyone look more certain than they felt. The church bells rang, shoes were polished, gloves were pulled on, hats were adjusted, and families moved through the front doors with the careful dignity of people entering both a sacred place and a neighborhood inspection. In 1950s, America for many communities church was not only where people prayed, it was where they were seen. It was where children learned how to sit still. Mothers compared casseroles without appearing to compare casseroles. Fathers shook hands as if closing moral business deals, and unmarried young women were gently placed on the great public shelf of future brides. Not officially, of course. No one handed out numbers. But if you were 23, 24, or heaven help the coffee hour 25 without a ring, the congregation had a way of noticing with Christian tenderness and social precision. Imagine yourself walking into church on a bright spring morning wearing a clean dress, white gloves and a hat that has been secured to your hair with enough pins to survive both wind and doctrine. Your mother walks beside you carrying a handbag and a quiet hope that today perhaps someone respectable will notice you. Your father nods to familiar men near the entrance. The vestibule smells of perfume hymnals, polished wood, and the faint powdery scent of women who have already been awake for hours arranging everyone into presentable condition. You smile at Mrs. Whittaker, who taught Sunday school before you were born and still looks at you as if she remembers when you spilled juice on the Christmas pageant costume. She takes your hand and says, "You look lovely, dear." Then comes the small pause. The pause is where marriage pressure lives. In church communities, respectability had a shape, and for many young women that shape pointed toward marriage. A nice girl attended services. A nice girl helped with the children's program, brought cookies to gatherings, sang in the choir, if she could carry a tune, and smiled politely at older women who introduced her to nephews' sons, visiting cousins and young men who had recently returned from the service and owned at least one serious necktie. The church could offer belonging, comfort, spiritual meaning, and real care. It could also become a social map showing which families were connected, which couples were admired, which young people were considered promising, and which unmarried women were quietly becoming subjects of concern. The sanctuary itself seemed to arrange life in stages. Young couples sat together, sometimes newly married and still glowing with the strange public shine of people who had recently survived a wedding. Families occupied pews in clusters, children shifting mothers, whispering fathers, pretending not to be sleepy during the sermon. Older widows sat with practiced calm, respected, but often pitied in ways no one said directly. And then there were the unmarried young women sitting with parents, siblings, or friends still attached to the family pew like a ribbon waiting to be tied somewhere else. You could sing the hymns, bow your head, and listen carefully, but part of you knew that after the service came coffee, and after coffee came questions. Church socials were especially important. They looked harmless, almost cozy. Folding tables, lemonade, coffee in metal urns, plates of cookies, bars sandwiches and pies, arranged with the solemn optimism of mid-century hospitality. But beneath the napkins and hymn-sing announcements, the social life of the church could function like a matchmaking exchange with better manners. Older women watched young men refill punch cups. Mothers noticed who spoke to whom. Aunts whispered that Harold from the hardware store had always been such a steady boy. Steady was one of those 1950s words that could make a man sound like a chair. Not thrilling, perhaps, but unlikely to collapse during dinner. You might stand near the refreshment table holding a paper cup when your mother appears beside you with an expression too casual to be trusted. "There's someone I'd like you to meet," she says. These words are never neutral. They are the opening notes of a familiar song. She guides you toward a young man in a grey suit who works at the bank or teaches math, or sells farm equipment, or is studying engineering, which makes every adult in the room look at him as if he has already been approved by the Department of Marriage. He smiles. You smile. Your mother smiles hardest of all. You discuss the weather, the sermon, and perhaps the terrible parking situation. Around you, several women pretend to discuss the bake sale while listening with the concentration of radio operators receiving messages from the moon. This was the respectable path. Meet in proper places, be introduced by proper people, attend proper events. Let the relationship become visible enough to reassure everyone, but not so dramatic that anyone had to use the word concerned. A church-approved romance carried a kind of social blessing before anything serious had happened. If he came from a known family, if his mother was reliable, if his father had a decent reputation, if he worshipped, and did not appear to own a suspicious motorcycle, then the courtship seemed safe. The community could understand it. The girl was moving in the right direction. The boy was serious, or at least serious-looking. Serious-looking was sometimes enough to get through 3 potlucks and a family picnic, but this path could also feel narrow. A young woman might find herself introduced to men not because she liked them, but because the community approved their ingredients. Good family, good job, good manners, good church attendance. The recipe sounded excellent, though the final dish sometimes arrived with no flavour at all. She might sit through conversations with men who were kind but dull, confident but condescending, or so quiet that one began to wonder if the Lord had blessed them with thoughts and hidden every single one. Yet rejecting them could be difficult. If she said no too often, people began to wonder whether she was too particular. If she said yes without interest, she risked drifting toward a life chosen by committee. The respectable marriage path promised safety, but safety could become a hallway with very few doors. Church also shaped reputation. A girl seen at services with the same young man for several Sundays might be considered almost serious. If he sat with her family, people noticed. If he joined them for Sunday dinner, people noticed harder. If he helped carry chairs after a social, or walked her to the car while her mother watched through the church window with the innocence of a lighthouse, then speculation began to warm itself by the stove. There was comfort in this. Public courtship protected a girl from certain kinds of gossip. It placed romance inside a supervised frame. But it also meant that private uncertainty became public theatre. You might not know whether you liked him yet, but Mrs. Whittaker had already imagined the reception menu. The church wedding was the bright destination at the end of this road. White dress aisle runner organ music flowers, Solemn vows, rice thrown outside photographs on the steps. The community gathered to witness not only love but order. A girl became a bride in front of the same people who had watched her grow up, sing in the children's choir, drop hymnals, serve lemonade, and stand awkwardly beside her mother at coffee hour. There was beauty in that continuity. There was also pressure. The church wedding told the community that the story had reached its proper chapter. The unmarried daughter had become a wife. The question had been answered. Everyone could exhale, congratulate her, and begin asking when she planned to have children because society never met a finish line. It did not immediately move. For women who did not follow the path, church could be both refuge and reminder. Some single women found deep purpose in church life. They taught Sunday school, organized charity drives, sang in choirs, cared for relatives, supported neighbors, and became pillars of community. Their lives mattered. Their work mattered. But they could still be spoken of with that small, soft sigh reserved for women considered incomplete by marital standards. She never married, someone might say, even after listing 20 years of service, kindness, discipline, and faith. As if marriage were the missing punctuation mark at the end of a long and generous sentence. This sadness is not that these women lacked value. The sadness is that their value was so often described as though it needed explanation. Different communities carried different expectations. Churches varied by denomination, region, race, class, ethnicity, and local custom. Some offered strong networks of support. Some enforced strict gender roles. Some encouraged education and public service for women. Others emphasized domesticity and obedience more heavily. In segregated communities, immigrant neighborhoods, rural towns, and working-class parishes, marriage pressures could carry additional layers of survival respectability, family duty, and protection. But across many settings, the same basic idea appeared again and again. A woman's adulthood became easiest for others to understand when it was attached to a husband. So you stand at coffee hour smiling over a paper cup while the room hums with hymns, gossip, matchmaking, and the clink of spoons against saucers. Your mother is across the room speaking to Mrs. Whittaker, probably about the bake sale, possibly about your entire future. The young man from the bank asks if you will be at the picnic next Saturday. You say perhaps. He smiles. It is a decent smile, a nice smile. The kind of smile that could become a date, then a Sunday dinner, then a photograph, then a ring, if everyone keeps nudging gently from the sides. And as sunlight falls through the church windows, soft and golden, on the polished floor, you feel the respectable path stretching out before you. It is warm. It is familiar. It is lined with people who mean well. And somewhere beneath their kindness, the quiet countdown continues. Beauty in 1950s. America was often treated like a woman's first line of defense. Before she spoke, before she worked, before she cooked, before she answered another question about whether there was anyone special, her appearance had already entered the room ahead of her. A dress could speak. A waistline could testify. Lipstick could reassure people that she had not given up. Hair could announce discipline, femininity, and access to either a good beauty parlour or an astonishing amount of patience. For an unmarried woman approaching 25, beauty was not simply vanity. It could feel like strategy. It was one more way to prove she was still in the running, still desirable, still fresh enough for the great social marketplace where everyone pretended not to be comparing the merchandise. Imagine yourself standing in front of a bedroom mirror on a weekday evening getting ready for a church social, a movie date or a dinner where someone's cousin might casually appear with his hair combed and his future inspected by every woman in the room. The lamp beside the mirror glows softly. On the vanity there is a little army of feminine equipment, lipstick, powder, cold cream perfume, bobby pins, a brush nail polish, and maybe a magazine folded open to an article promising that the right shade of coral could brighten not only your face, but apparently your entire destiny. Your dress is laid out on the bed. Your stockings are waiting in a careful coil. You check them for runs with the seriousness of a bank examiner. One ladder up the leg and suddenly the whole evening feels morally unstable. The beauty routine could be soothing. There was pleasure in the ritual, the scent of face powder, the cool touch of cream, the little snap of a compact opening, the satisfaction of lipstick applied evenly like setting a boundary between yourself and the day. A woman could enjoy looking pretty. She could enjoy fashion, perfume, curls, gloves, matching shoes, and the soft swish of a skirt when she walked. None of that was false, but the pressure came from the way beauty was tied to worth timing and opportunity. A young woman was not only encouraged to look nice, she was reminded gently and constantly that her looks were temporary capital, and the wise girl did not waste capital while the market was open. Magazines did not help calm anyone down. Their pages were full of smiling women with flawless complexions, tiny waists, smooth hair, and the kind of relaxed confidence only possible when a photographer, a lighting assistant, and 3 people with powder brushes are standing nearby. Advice columns taught girls how to flatter their faces, trim their figures, dress for their type, and choose colours that made men notice them without suspecting they had intended to be noticed. There were tips for problem skin-tired eyes, limp hair, heavy hips, thin lips, round faces, square faces, and every other ordinary human feature that could be transformed into a small emergency if placed beside enough advertisements. A girl could begin reading for fun and finish convinced her elbows were sabotaging her future. The waistline carried special importance. In the post-war ideal, many women were encouraged to look feminine in a very specific shape. Neat waist, full skirt, smooth hips, lifted bust, and a silhouette that seemed designed by someone who admired hourglasses but had never worn a girdle in August. Foundation garments promised improvement, control, uplift, restraint, and other words that sounded less like fashion and more like municipal planning. The girdle was not merely clothing, it was architecture. It held the body in the approved arrangement, sometimes at the cost of breathing deeply, sitting comfortably, or remembering that internal organs had once enjoyed freedom. But a woman wore it because the mirror, the magazines, and the culture all agreed that effort was required while visible effort was unladylike. Hair was another battlefield. Curls had to be set, brushed, sprayed, pinned, and persuaded into a style that looked soft while being nearly indestructible. Sleeping in rollers was treated as a normal sacrifice, though it gave many women the nighttime profile of a small mechanical hedgehog. Beauty parlours became important social spaces where women sat under dryers, read magazines, exchanged news, and emerged with hair shaped for public approval. For an unmarried woman, a fresh hairstyle could feel like preparation for possibility. Maybe tonight someone would notice. Maybe Sunday coffee hour would bring an introduction. Maybe the boy from the office would finally ask her out. Hope could be tucked into a curl just as easily as a bobby pin. But beauty had an expiration date in the imagination of the period, and that was the cruel part. A woman at 25 was still young by any honest measure. Yet in communities where marriage was expected, early people could speak as if her best chances were already beginning to fade. You won't always be so pretty, a mother might say, not to wound, but to warn. An aunt might advise, enjoy your looks while you have them, as if a woman's face were a coupon about to expire at the department store. Compliments became clocks. "You're such a pretty girl" often carried the unfinished sentence, "so why aren't you married yet?" Beauty did not protect a woman from questions. Sometimes it intensified them. If she was pretty and still single people wanted an explanation faster, this fear of losing your chance affected even small decisions. Should you cut your hair, or would men prefer it longer? Should you wear red lipstick, or would that seem too bold? Should you diet before the dance, buy a new dress for the picnic change? Your perfume smile more, speak less, seem softer, seem brighter, seem less tired. The unmarried woman could find herself adjusting the surface of her life in hopes of changing the direction of her future. And every adjustment carried a question underneath. Is this why no one has asked? Is this why he did not call again? Is this why my friends are engaged and I am still standing here powdering my nose, as if the right shade might unlock the next chapter? Beauty also had to be respectable. That was another impossible balance. A young woman was expected to attract men without seeming to invite them too openly. A dress that was too plain might suggest she had no charm. A dress that was too fitted might suggest she had too much. Makeup should enhance, not announce. Perfume should be noticed only after someone came close enough to deserve noticing it. A girl learned to dress for male attention and female judgment at the same time, which is rather like performing for two audiences that disagree about the script. Men might admire, women might evaluate, mothers might correct, strangers might assume, and through it all the girl was supposed to appear natural. The department store was both dreamland and courtroom. You could walk past glass counters of lipstick, gloves, handbags, powders, stockings, and little bottles that promised allure in French names. Saleswomen knew how to lean in and say, "This shade is very becoming," with the solemnity of a priest offering absolution. Mannequins stood in windows wearing dresses for dates, weddings, luncheons, honeymoons, and lives that seemed to come fully accessorized. A woman could look at those displays and feel both possibility and lack. The store whispered that transformation was available but never complete. Buy the dress, fix the hair, smooth the waist, brighten the mouth, try again. The fear was not only about attracting a man, it was about remaining visible in a culture that often treated unmarried women as fading from the main story. A married woman could age into motherhood, household authority, church committees, neighborhood respect, and eventually the formidable power of a woman who knew exactly who brought store-bought cookies to the bake sale. But an unmarried woman's aging was watched differently. People wondered whether she'd missed something, whether she had become too set in her ways, whether her beauty had passed before she could trade it for a ring. That idea was deeply unfair, but it shaped the emotional weather around many young women. They did not invent the clock. They simply heard it ticking near every mirror. And yet mirrors could also be private places of resistance. A woman might look at herself and see more than a potential wife. She might see intelligence in her eyes, humor at the corner of her mouth, strength in the set of her shoulders. She might enjoy the red lipstick, not because a man liked it, but because she did. She might wear the dress for the pleasure of movement, the perfume for memory, the curls because they made her feel ready to meet the world on her own terms. Even inside pressure, women found small spaces of choice. They borrowed beauty from the culture and used it for themselves when they could. So tonight, when we imagine that young woman at the mirror, we should not see her as foolish for caring how she looks. We should see the world behind her reflection. The magazines, the mothers, the department stores, the church, socials, the office, glances, the engagement photographs, the birthday candles, the warnings disguised as compliments. She's not just applying lipstick. She's preparing herself for judgment and hope at the same time. She's trying to look lovely without looking desperate, youthful without looking childish, polished, without looking artificial, available without looking easy. That is a great deal to ask of one small mirror. She takes one last look before leaving the room. The dress is right enough. The lipstick is even enough. The hair is holding for now by the grace of spray and prayer. Downstairs, someone calls that it is time to go. She turns off the lamp, picks up her gloves and steps into the hallway. Somewhere ahead there may be music conversation, another introduction, another polite question, another chance. And behind her on the vanity the mirror holds the quiet shape of a fear she cannot quite say out loud, that beauty is a door and every year people seem to believe it closes a little more. Going steady in 1950s, America was the teenage version of a press release. It was not quite engagement, not quite marriage, and not quite freedom. It lived in that delicate middle space where two young people were expected to like each other enough to become publicly identified as a pair, but not so much that parents started gripping the arms of their chairs. To go steady meant that a boy and a girl were no longer simply dating around, meeting at dances, sharing sodas, and pretending not to wait by the telephone. Now there was an understanding, a visible one, a social one. The kind of understanding that could be confirmed by a class ring on a chain, a letter sweater over a girl's shoulders, a name written carefully in a notebook, or the sudden way everyone at school stopped asking who you were going with and started asking where he was. Imagine yourself at 17 or 18 standing by your locker after school while the hallway buzzes around you. Books slam shut. Boys shove each other near the stairs. Girls move in little groups carrying binders against their chests, watching everything while pretending to watch nothing. Then he appears. Maybe he is on the basketball team. Maybe he works at the gas station after class. Maybe he has a car which in the economy of teenage romance is almost unfairly powerful. He leans beside your locker with the casual posture of someone who has practiced being casual in a mirror and asks if you want to go to the drive-in again on Friday. You say yes. You say it lightly. But inside, some small committee of hopes has begun taking minutes. At first, dating could be vague. A movie here, a school dance there, a ride home after a basketball game, a phone call that stretched long enough for your mother to walk past twice and your father to mutter something about tying up the line. But going steady changed the meaning of everything. The same actions became evidence of commitment. If he walked you to class, people noticed. If he carried your books, people noticed. If you wore his jacket at the football game, the entire bleacher section could interpret it before the marching band finished warming up. Nothing says private affection quite like 50 teenagers silently confirming that your romantic status has been updated. The tokens mattered. A boy's class ring might be too large for a girl's finger, so she wore it on a chain around her neck where it rested like a small metal promise. Sometimes she wrapped yarn or tape around it to make it fit because apparently romance required basic engineering. A letter sweater could be borrowed and worn proudly, sleeves too long wool, scratchy smelling faintly of the boy, the locker room, and whatever mysterious substance lived inside high school hallways. These objects told the world that a girl had been chosen not just for one evening but for a season of public loyalty. She belonged to a couple now. Her name was spoken with his. Her plans were assumed to involve him. Her Saturday nights had become less available to speculation, for a girl going steady could feel wonderful. There was relief in being known as someone's girl. The weekly uncertainty quieted down. You no longer had to wonder whether anyone would ask you to the dance, whether the phone would ring, whether you would be standing with friends while other girls paired off under gymnasium streamers. There was a sweetness in the ordinary rhythm. He waited after class. He called after dinner. He saved you a seat. He knew how you took your soda. You learned the shape of his handwriting, the sound of his car outside, the particular way he cleared his throat before saying something important or completely unnecessary. Young love even under rules was still young love. It could make a girl float through algebra as if polynomials had personally blessed her future. But going steady also carried pressure because public proof of seriousness invited public expectations. Parents watched more carefully once a relationship had a name. Friends assumed more, teachers noticed. Church ladies smiled with meaning. A boy who had once been simply a date became a possible future. Not a definite future perhaps, but possible enough for adults to start arranging him quietly inside their imagination. Was he from a good family? Did he have plans? Was he polite? Did he work? Would he go to college? Did he seem steady in the deeper sense, the way adults use the word when they meant employable, reliable, unlikely to vanish at the first sign of a mortgage? A girl could go steady for companionship and suddenly find herself standing at the edge of a much larger conversation. There was also a hidden narrowing. Once she was going steady, a girl was expected to be loyal. That sounds simple, and often it was fair enough. But it also meant that her social world could shrink around one boy. If she talked to other boys, people noticed. If she laughed too much with someone else, people noticed with enthusiasm. If she wanted to end the relationship, the entire community might need to be informed through whispers, tears returned, rings, and a hallway silence so dramatic it deserved its own orchestra. Going steady made romance orderly, but it also made it harder to change a mind without an audience. The girl had to manage the emotional temperature. Serious but not too serious. Affectionate but not reckless. Loyal but not trapped. Hopeful but not obviously planning a wedding during chemistry class. If she seemed indifferent, people wondered what was wrong. If she seemed devoted, people warned her not to get carried away. If the relationship lasted, everyone began to ask whether it was heading somewhere. If it ended, everyone wanted to know why. The couple became a small public institution, like a school club with more hand-holding and less paperwork. Parents often preferred going steady to casual dating because it seemed safer. One known boy was easier to supervise than a rotating cast of possible trouble in clean shirts. A mother could learn his manners. A father could inspect his handshake. A family could invite him for Sunday dinner where he would be tested against roast beef conversation and the terrifying responsibility of passing butter correctly. If he behaved well, the household relaxed a little. If he behaved badly, the girl might hear about it in the kitchen later while drying plates. The family did not just evaluate him. They evaluated the version of her that appeared beside him. Did she seem happy? Was she too distracted? Was she becoming too serious? Did he bring out her best? Or did he make her miss curfew with suspicious regularity? And then there was the delicate question of physical boundaries. Going steady implied closeness, and closeness made adults nervous. The same relationship that reassured parents also gave them something new to fear. More dates meant more car rides, more porches, more movie balconies, more moments when supervision thinned and reputation stood alone in a cardigan. Girls were often made responsible for holding the line. They were told to be careful, to set limits, to remember what kind of girl they were, to avoid giving a boy the wrong idea. The boy might be expected to behave, but the girl was expected to prevent both behavior and gossip. It was a remarkable arrangement, really. Society handed her the breaks, the map, the reputation, and the blame, then told her to enjoy the ride. For some couples, going steady became the first step toward marriage. High school sweethearts could become engaged after graduation, or after a boy finished military service, or after he found work solid enough to support a home. Families liked that story. It was tidy. It made sense. Boy meets girl, boy gives ring, girl waits, boy returns, couple marries, everyone eats cake. The story had rhythm, it had photographs, it had a clean moral shape. But real life did not always move so neatly. Some girls outgrew their steady boy. Some boys outgrew responsibility. Some relationships were more habit than love. Some girls stayed because being attached felt safer than returning to the uncertain pool of being available. And some stayed because the world had taught them that being chosen was better than being free to choose again. That is where going steady connected to the larger marriage deadline. It trained young women to measure progress through public signs. First the date, then the regular date, then the ring on the chain, then the family dinners, then the serious talk, then the engagement, then marriage before anyone started worrying aloud. Each step seemed natural, even sweet, but together they formed a path, and stepping off that path could feel like failure even when it was wisdom. A girl who ended a steady relationship at 22 might be told she had done the right thing. At 24, the same choice could make relatives inhale sharply. At 25, breaking up with a steady man could be treated like setting fire to your own lifeboat. Still within the ritual, there were tender moments worth remembering. Two young people sitting in a parked car under a streetlight talking softly before curfew. A girl turning a class ring between her fingers while pretending to study. A boy walking 3 extra blocks just to carry her books. A shared milkshake at the soda fountain, 2 straws leaning toward each other like punctuation marks in a love letter. These moments were real. The affection was real. The excitement was real. The ache was real when things ended. History becomes too flat if we only see the pressure and forget the sweetness that made people cooperate with it. So when we picture the girl wearing his ring on a chain, we should see both things at once. The flutter in her chest when he first gave it to her, and the weight of what that ring began to say on her behalf. It said she was chosen. It said she was serious. It said she was moving in the expected direction. It quieted some questions and awakened others. And as she walked through the school hallway, the little ring resting against her sweater, she carried not only a token of teenage affection, but the first small rehearsal for a diamond. Somewhere ahead, beyond homework football games, soda fountains, and Sunday dinners, another ring waited in the imagination of everyone around her. And once people had seen one symbol of seriousness, they naturally began listening for the next. An engagement ring in 1950s. America was small enough to fit on one finger and large enough to change the way an entire room spoke to you. It was not only jewellery, it was evidence. A bright little announcement that a woman had crossed from uncertainty into promise, from being asked about her future to having one officially under inspection. The ring said someone had chosen her, and just as importantly that he had chosen her in a way other people could see. Before the wedding dress, before the bridal shower, before the department store registry, and the aunt who suddenly had opinions about cake filling, there was the hand. Lifted over coffee cups, held out beneath office lights, displayed over lunch tables. A hand that had become public property because now there was a diamond on it. Imagine yourself on a Monday morning in 1957 walking into the office after a weekend that has turned your life into news. Your gloves are in your purse because you want people to notice, but not too obviously. That is the entire art of being engaged. You must want admiration but pretend you are not expecting it. You sit at your desk, remove your coat, and begin arranging papers with your left hand positioned just slightly more visibly than usual. Not enough to seem theatrical. Just enough for Helen from bookkeeping to stop mid-sentence and gasp. And then it begins. Chairs scrape. Typewriters pause. Women gather. Someone says, "Let me see." Someone else asks how he did it. A third person asks when the wedding will be, because apparently a proposal is not allowed to breathe for even 5 minutes before being assigned a calendar. The ring changes your title immediately. Yesterday you were a girl people worried about or wondered about or introduced to available cousins with steady jobs. Today you are a fiancé. The word itself has a little perfume on it. It sounds elegant, almost European, as if your life has suddenly acquired better lighting. Adults say it with approval. Your mother says it on the telephone to relatives, savouring each syllable like a dessert she's been waiting years to serve. She's engaged. There is relief in her voice, even if she tries to hide it beneath excitement. Your father nods in a way that suggests a transaction has been properly initiated, though now he has to worry about money guest lists and the terrifying speed at which napkins become expensive. The ring was proof that the courtship had become serious enough for society to stop guessing and start planning. It quieted certain questions and awakened 100 others. No more. Are you seeing anyone? No more. Is there a young man in the picture? No more soft panic about whether you were waiting too long. Now the questions had uniforms. When is the date? Where will you live? Is he saving money? Will you keep working until the wedding? What colours are you thinking? Does his mother approve? Are you going to have a church ceremony? A woman could go from being interrogated about singleness to being interrogated about marriage with such speed that one almost admired the efficiency. In many families, the engagement ring also reassured people that the man had intentions. Intentions were very important. A man could take a girl to movies, dances, church picnics, soda fountains, and Sunday drives, but until there was a ring, the relationship still floated in a dangerous fog of maybe. The diamond made things legible. It told parents that the young man was not merely enjoying her company, gasoline, and free pie after dinner. He was committed. He had made a promise with financial weight, family awareness, and enough sparkle to survive inspection by women who knew how to judge a ring without appearing rude. The ring said, "I am serious." It also said, "Please begin discussing china patterns." But the ring was not judged only as a symbol. It was judged as an object which could be awkward for everyone involved. Was it large enough, clear enough, tasteful enough? Did it sit well on her hand? Had he saved for it? Had his family helped? Was it a family ring? Was it too flashy? Too modest? Too modern? Too old-fashioned? Women might say, "It's lovely and mean it." Or they might say, "It's sweet," which could mean anything from charming to tragically small, but we're all being kind. The girl had to defend it without seeming defensive. She had to love it because it came from him, even if she had secretly imagined something different from the jewelry ads that glittered in magazines like tiny promises from capitalism itself. At the office, the ring could change a woman's future overnight. A secretary who'd been seen as dependable and possibly lingering too long at her desk suddenly became temporary again. Engagement restored the expected order. Now everyone understood why she was there. She was working until marriage, saving for linens, filling time before the real life began. Her boss might congratulate her and then begin wondering who would replace her after the wedding, as if the ring had already packed her desk. The younger girls might admire her. The older unmarried woman might smile warmly, perhaps with genuine happiness, perhaps with a small private ache no one noticed. Engagement did not simply elevate one woman. It quietly rearranged the meaning of the women around her. At home, the ring transformed the household into a planning office. Your mother, who once worried whether you would ever marry, now worries whether the guest list will offend your father's cousins. Your aunt wants to know if you will wear lace. Your grandmother has strong feelings about veils. A neighbour offers to lend punch bowls, which is kind, though she also uses the visit to inspect your ring under direct light. Suddenly your future has errands, florists' invitations, church availability, bridal showers, announcements, photographs, deposits, dresses, fittings, thank you notes, and the mysterious politics of who must be seated near whom without reopening a family argument from 1948. Romance has become administration, and still beneath the planning the ring could feel magical. It could catch light while you washed your hands. It could flash on the steering wheel, on a hymn book, on the handle of your purse. You might find yourself looking at it during quiet moments, turning your hand slightly just to confirm that the weekend had really happened. Someone had asked. You had answered. The future, once vague and cloudy, now had a bright point of focus. For a young woman who had spent years hearing the soft clock of expectation, the ring could bring relief so deep it almost felt like sleep. You were no longer falling behind. You were on the path. Everyone could see it. But that relief came with its own silence. Once the ring was on, certain doubts became harder to speak. What if you were not sure? What if the proposal came at the right time from a decent man in front of all the hopes everyone had placed around you, but your heart was quieter than you expected? What if you loved him, but also felt frightened by how quickly your own name began to disappear beneath wedding plans? What if the ring answered everyone else's question before you had finished asking your own? These were not easy thoughts to admit in a room full of congratulations. An engaged girl was supposed to glow, not pause. She was supposed to discuss flowers, not fear. The diamond was evidence of happiness, and evidence can be difficult to argue with. The public nature of engagement made backing away complicated. Breaking a date was one thing. Ending a steady relationship was painful. But ending an engagement could feel like stepping onto a stage and announcing that the community had misunderstood the plot. Families might be embarrassed. Gifts might need returning. Explanations would be requested, then repeated, then improved by gossip, until they bore little resemblance to the truth. A woman might stay because she loved him. She might stay because she was ready. She might also stay because the ring had become heavier than anyone admitted. Sometimes the symbol of security became its own kind of pressure. For women approaching 25, the engagement ring could feel especially powerful. It arrived not only as love but as rescue from interpretation. No more pitying glances at weddings. No more jokes about being next. No more careful suggestions from mothers and aunts. The ring silenced the phrase "still single" and replaced it with "soon married." That change mattered. It gave a woman social protection. It made her future respectable before the marriage had even begun. But it could also tempt people to confuse proof with peace. A diamond proved that a proposal happened. It did not prove that the girl was ready, understood, cherished, or free from the old fear of disappointing everyone. So picture her again, sitting on the edge of her bed at night, the room quiet, the ring catching a little moonlight from the window. Downstairs, her mother may still be talking on the phone, telling one more relative the good news. Tomorrow there will be more questions, more congratulations, more planning, more admiration of her hand. She may smile. She may feel joy. She may feel relief. She may feel a small trembling uncertainty beneath the sparkle and not yet know what to call it. The ring rests lightly on her finger, but the world has placed so much meaning inside it that it seems to glow with more than love. It glows with approval, expectation, proof, and the soft closing of one chapter before the next has fully opened. A bridal shower in 1950s. America looked like a party, but it often behaved like a training session with cake. There were pastel napkins, paper ribbons, polite laughter, and women gathered in a living room that had been cleaned so thoroughly even the lamps seemed nervous. The bride-to-be sat in the place of honour, smiling beneath the gentle weight of everyone's expectations, while gifts arrived wrapped in tissue paper and prophecy. Towels, sheets, mixing bowls, measuring cups, a casserole dish large enough to handle both dinner and disappointment. Each package said congratulations, but many of them also whispered, "Here is what your new life will require." Imagine yourself sitting in your aunt's front room on a Saturday afternoon wearing a nice dress, a fresh set of curls and the engagement ring everyone has already inspected at least twice. The sofa has been pulled slightly forward to make space. Folding chairs line the wall. A card table holds punch finger sandwiches, nuts, mints, and a cake decorated with pink roses that taste mostly like sugar and social obligation. Around you sit mothers, aunts, cousins, church ladies, office friends, neighbours, and at least one woman whose connection to the family is unclear but who seems deeply invested in your towel supply. Everyone is smiling. Everyone is pleased. Everyone is also watching how you receive your future. The gifts are opened one by one, and with every ribbon untied, wifehood becomes more physical. It is no longer just a promise, a ring, or a photograph. It is cotton, glass, metal, ceramic, and instructions. A set of dish towels embroidered with days of the week, as if Monday itself will someday require its own cloth. Pillowcases trimmed with lace. A tablecloth for company dinners. A roasting pan which suggests that married life will involve large pieces of meat and the confidence to manage them. A hand mixer if the gift giver is feeling modern. Measuring spoons because love may be mysterious, but apparently baking powder must be exact. You hold each item up for the room to admire, and the room makes the correct approving sounds. Every how lovely is also a little lesson. The older women offer advice with the gifts, not always directly. Sometimes the advice arrives in stories. This kind of pan is wonderful for Sunday roast. You'll want extra towels once children come. A good set of sheets makes a house feel settled. Always rinse the good china right away. The advice is practical and much of it is useful. There is real wisdom in women who have kept homes running through illness shortages, small budgets, and men who believed laundry happened by weather. But beneath the helpfulness is the message that marriage will now become your main occupation even if no one uses those words. The shower is not simply preparing you for a wedding. It is preparing you to be measured as a wife. Hope chests carried the same feeling, only more quietly. A hope chest might sit at the foot of a bed for years, polished and waiting, filled slowly with linens, embroidered cloths, handmade towels, and small household treasures, meant for the home a girl had not yet entered. It smelled of cedar fabric and anticipation. Sometimes it was romantic. A young woman could open it and feel she was touching the future. Sometimes it was comforting because every folded sheet suggested that someone believed she would be loved, married, and settled. But sometimes the hope chest was a box full of other people's certainty. It held not only linens but a life already imagined. Bedroom, kitchen, husband, guests, babies. Company towels nobody was allowed to use except in the event of important visitors or possibly the second coming. For a girl who'd been raised with one, the hope chest began long before the engagement. It was assembled through birthdays, Christmas gifts, and small offerings from female relatives. A monogrammed pillowcase, a crocheted doily, a set of napkins, a dish towel stitched by a grandmother whose own hands had known decades of work. These things were given with love. They were also signals. They said, someday you will have a home of your own. Someday you will set a table. Someday you will become the woman behind the door, the one who remembers where the clean sheets are, how much flour is left, which neighbour cannot eat onions, and whether the good silver has been polished before Easter. Childhood and marriage were connected by thread cedar and the quiet accumulation of useful objects. The bridal shower made this future public. The bride-to-be did not simply receive gifts. She demonstrated readiness. She thanked everyone properly. She admired each item. She laughed at gentle jokes about cooking husbands and the mysteries of married life. She showed that she understood the performance. A woman could not sigh over another towel and say, how many surfaces am I expected to dry in this marriage? She had to smile. The proper response to domestic equipment was delight. The toaster was not just a toaster. It was a symbol of breakfast. The mixing bowl was not just a bowl, it was a symbol of hospitality. The vacuum cleaner, if someone was generous or dramatic enough to give one, was practically a wedding vow with a cord. Games were often played too, because no ritual of female transition was complete without making grown women guess household items in a bag. There might be a quiz about the groom. There might be advice cards. There might be a ribbon bouquet made from the gift wrappings for the bride to carry at the rehearsal. Everyone laughed, and the laughter mattered. It softened the pressure. It turned fear into ceremony. It allowed married women to pass knowledge to the next woman in line without saying too plainly that marriage could be lonely, exhausting, or much harder than the engagement photographs suggested. Instead, they joked. Never go to bed angry. Let him think he fixed it. Keep a little money tucked away. That last one might be said lightly, but the room understood more than it admitted. Sometimes the advice was about pleasing a husband. Have dinner ready if you can. Keep the house nice. Do not greet him with complaints the moment he comes through the door. Learn what he likes. Be patient. Be cheerful. Choose your battles, though no one provided a list of available battles or instructions for surviving the ones you did not choose. Some of this advice came from affection and experience. Some of it came from an unequal world that expected women to manage the emotional weather inside marriage, while men were congratulated for remembering anniversaries. The young bride sat smiling, absorbing the rules that had shaped the women before her. She might feel loved. She might feel honoured. She might also feel somewhere beneath the cake and ribbon that she was being handed a job no one had fully described. The unmarried girls at the shower watched too. They learned from the edge of the room. A bridal shower showed them what success looked like in the language of their community. The ring, the gifts, the attention, the older women fussing over the bride, the mother glowing with relief and pride. It all formed a picture. This is what happens when you are chosen. This is how the room changes around you. This is how your future becomes worth celebrating. For the girl who had not yet reached that moment, the shower could be sweet and painful at the same time. She could be happy for her friend while wondering when or whether the same chair would be placed in the centre of a living room for her. There were women for whom the bridal shower felt like triumph. They wanted the home, the husband, the dishes, the life being assembled around them. They took real pleasure in choosing patterns, folding linens, planning meals, and imagining a kitchen where they would build something warm and lasting. That desire deserves respect. Domestic dreams were not automatically false because society praised them. Many women found meaning, creativity, pride, and love in homemaking. The problem was not that some women wanted the life inside the hope chest. The problem was that the culture often acted as if every woman should want it, and should want it on time. So the shower continued. More gifts, more laughter, more ribbon curling on the floor. The bride's notebook filled with names so thank you notes could be sent later, because gratitude, like marriage, required organisation. At the end of the afternoon, the room smelled of coffee cake, perfume, and tissue paper. The women put on gloves, gathered purses, and kissed cheeks goodbye. The gifts were packed carefully into boxes and carried to the car, each one a small piece of the household waiting to be born. Everyone said it had been lovely, and it had been lovely. That was the complicated truth. It was lovely and heavy, tender and instructional, a celebration and a syllabus. Later, alone for a moment, the bride might run her hand over the folded towels, the smooth sheets, the new bowls stacked one inside another. She might feel excitement, gratitude, nervousness, and a strange grief she could not explain. The life she'd been moving toward for years was no longer abstract. It had weight now. It could be lifted, washed, stored, broken, used, and expected. The hope chest was opening. The gifts were waiting. The women had spoken in stories, jokes, and recipes, and somewhere beneath the rustle of tissue paper wifehood was no longer a dream in the distance. It was standing very near, wearing an apron, holding a casserole dish and asking if she was ready. A friend group in 1950s America did not disappear all at once. It changed one ring at a time. At first the girls were simply girls together, walking home from school, sharing lipstick in the restroom mirror, whispering about boys, trading magazines, saving seats at the movies, and laughing so hard at the soda fountain that the man behind the counter looked over as if joy itself were making too much noise. They belonged to one another before they belonged to anyone else. They had private jokes, borrowed sweaters, favourite songs, and 1,000 small rituals that made youth feel endless. Then one of them started going steady. Then another wore a class ring on a chain. Then someone got engaged. And slowly, almost politely, the group began turning into wives. Imagine yourself at 22 sitting with your girlfriends in a booth at a soda fountain on a warm Friday night. The jukebox is glowing in the corner. Someone has ordered a cherry Coke. Someone else is sharing French fries she claimed she did not want. There are handbags on the seat, gloves folded beside napkins, and enough perfume in the air to make the milkshake machine seem emotionally involved. You all talk at once. Work dresses, movies, mother's dates, plans for Saturday. The girl from high school who married a man nobody liked but now has a washing machine people envy. The evening feels ordinary, safe, familiar. You do not know yet that someday you will remember this booth like a little island before the tide came in. The first engagement is exciting. Everyone crowds around the lucky girl's hand, making admiring sounds over the ring. You ask how he proposed. You ask if she cried. You ask when the wedding will be. The questions come easily because you are happy for her and because this is what girls have been trained to do. Celebrate the one who has been chosen. Begin the ceremony of sending her forward. She blushes and tells the story, half embarrassed and half glowing. The rest of you listen with the wide-eyed seriousness of people watching the future become possible. For a few days, maybe a few weeks, the whole group feels elevated by her news. One of you has crossed into the next chapter, and it seems to prove that the chapter exists for everyone. Then come the bridal plans. Lunches become planning sessions. The engaged friend talks about dresses, flowers, invitations, church dates, and whether his mother is being helpful or merely present too often. She's still your friend, of course, but her time begins to belong to other things. Fittings, family dinners, meetings with the minister, shopping for towels, writing thank you notes, looking at apartments. You still meet for coffee, but now she brings a notebook. She still laughs at the old jokes, but sometimes her eyes move toward the future while the rest of you are still seated in the booth. This is not betrayal. This is transition. But transition can ache even when nobody has done anything wrong. After the wedding, she changes again, not in a dramatic way. She does not become a stranger overnight, but her life develops a new center. She has a husband now, and the word husband enters every conversation with the shiny newness of a recently purchased appliance. My husband likes this. My husband says that. We are saving for a dinette set. We may visit his parents on Sunday. You smile and listen. You are glad for her, truly. But you also notice that we has replaced I in the way she talks, and the friend you once called at any hour now has dinner to start, laundry to fold, and someone else's family to consider before saying yes to a movie. Then the second friend gets engaged. This time the joy is still real, but something else enters the room. A faint calculation. Not jealousy exactly, not bitterness. More like the feeling of standing on a train platform while another person boards with a suitcase and waves from the window. You wave back. You want her to have a good journey. But after the train leaves, you're still standing there holding your gloves, wondering when your own will arrive. By the third engagement, the group's conversations have shifted. Less about dances and office gossip, more about recipes, rent china patterns, in-laws, and whether a husband should be allowed to choose living room curtains without supervision, which most sensible women agree is risky business. The single girls become fewer. That is when the old friendships begin to feel uneven. Married friends are busy and their busyness is respected. They have homes to set up meals, to plan relatives to visit, and husbands who somehow require more scheduling than anyone expected. Single friends are assumed to have time. They can help address invitations. They can attend showers. They can babysit later. They can listen. They can be available. The unmarried woman is still part of the circle, but increasingly as witness, helper, guest, and reliable extra pair of hands. She's expected to celebrate every milestone while quietly absorbing the fact that her own milestones have not yet arrived. The language changes too. Married friends begin giving advice, sometimes kindly, sometimes with the mild authority of women who've been wives for 8 months and now speak as if they crossed the Oregon Trail. You'll understand when you're married, they say. It is usually not meant to wound. But it creates a little wall. There is the world of wives with its inside knowledge, private complaints, grocery budgets, and jokes about husbands leaving socks in impossible locations. And there is the world of the unmarried friend, still dating, still working, still answering family questions, still arriving at gatherings alone, unless she brings a man who must be inspected like luggage at customs. She has not changed, but the room has. Baby news often completed the transformation. First came the wedding showers, then the baby showers, the same living rooms, the same punch bowls, different gifts, tiny blankets, rattles, diaper pins, little sweaters folded like soft promises. A friend who once stayed out late talking about movie stars now discusses feeding schedules, swollen ankles, and whether the baby looks more like her or his side of the family, which can become a diplomatic issue if handled carelessly. You sit in the room smiling at the small gifts, and suddenly the distance becomes clearer. The group has not simply become wives, it is becoming mothers. The next chapter is already opening, and you are still trying to decide whether the last date you went on was disappointing or just adequately dull. This is where the fear of being left behind grew sharper. Not because married friends were unkind. Many were loving, loyal, and eager to include you, but their lives moved according to a different clock now. They left early because husbands were waiting. They hosted instead of wandered. They saved money instead of buying movie tickets on impulse. Their apartments and little houses became the new meeting places, and you were invited into kitchens where they stood in aprons, proud and tired, asking if you wanted coffee while a roast cooked and a baby slept in the next room. You admired them. You missed them. You wondered whether this was what adulthood looked like and whether you were late for it. For a single woman approaching 25, every changing friendship could feel like evidence. If all your friends were marrying, then perhaps the world was right to ask about you. If they seemed settled, perhaps you were drifting. If they complained about husbands and housework but still received the respect of married women, perhaps even their exhaustion had more social value than your freedom. That was one of the quiet traps. Marriage could be difficult, confining, even lonely, but it made a woman's life legible. Singleness might offer space, income, friendship, and self-knowledge, but the culture often treated it as a waiting room with poor lighting, and yet the single friend saw things others missed. She saw the newly married girl's smile tighten when her husband interrupted her story. She saw the friend with a baby look longingly at a magazine article about travel. She heard complaints whispered in kitchens after the men went into the other room. She noticed that being chosen did not end every loneliness. The married friends had crossed the visible deadline, but they had entered a different set of rules. Dinner had to be ready, babies had to be quiet, houses had to look decent, husbands had to be managed gently, which was a polite way of saying women were expected to perform emotional carpentry without tools. The single woman might envy them, but she was also close enough to see the cost. Still, Saturday nights became quieter. The phone rang less often. The soda fountain booth held strangers now. The old group photographs began to feel like artifacts from another country. There you all were, arms-linked hair curled, laughing in matching youth before rings sorted the room into wives' mothers, and the ones still asked when it would be their turn. Sometimes you looked at those pictures and felt no bitterness, only wonder. How quickly a group of girls could become a row of wedding announcements. How softly life could separate people, while everyone kept saying they must get together soon. The friend group did not die. It adapted. There were coffee visits, holiday cards, baby gifts, recipe exchanges, and occasional evenings when the old laughter returned so suddenly it startled everyone. For 1 hour at a kitchen table after the dishes were done, the wives became girls again. They remembered songs, bad dates, school dances, the teacher with a terrible perfume, the movie you all saw twice because the lead actor had cheekbones worth studying. Then a baby cried, or a husband called from another room, or someone remembered the laundry and the spell faded gently. The girls were still there, but now they lived under layers of duty names, houses and expectations. So when we picture the unmarried woman watching her friends become wives, we should not reduce her to envy. She was witnessing a social migration. One by one her friends moved into the approved adult world, and each departure made her own position more visible. She could be happy for them, she could miss them. She could fear becoming the last one in the booth stirring a soda, while the jukebox played songs for girls who'd already gone home to husbands. The marriage deadline grew louder, not only because parents asked or magazines warned or churches introduced nice young men. It grew louder because friendship itself began to change shape. And as another friend held out her hand beneath the light diamond flashing, everyone leaned in to admire it, while the girl without a ring quietly folded her own hands in her lap. 25 did not make a woman old. It did something stranger. In many 1950s living rooms, offices, churches and family kitchens, it made her noticeable. Not visibly changed, not suddenly different in the mirror, not less young when she brushed her hair or buttoned her blouse in the morning. But socially something shifted. The same woman who'd been called a girl at 22 could become by 25 a subject of careful concern. She still wore lipstick. She still went to work, rode buses, bought birthday cards, laughed with friends and reached for the good gloves before leaving the house. But if there was no ring on her finger, people began to look at the empty space as if it had started speaking. Imagine waking up on your 25th birthday in a small bedroom where the wallpaper is still the same one your mother chose years ago. A card sits on the dresser. A little wrapped gift waits beside it, probably a scarf, a compact, or a bottle of perfume meant to say celebration without saying time is passing. The morning light is soft. Downstairs someone is already making coffee. For a moment you are simply yourself. Warm under the blanket, half awake, listening to the ordinary sounds of the house. Then you remember the number. 25. Not elderly, not tragic, not anything that should require a national statement. And yet the number settles over the room like a hat you did not choose but everyone expects you to wear. At breakfast, your mother kisses your cheek and says happy birthday with real tenderness. Your father gives you a card and tells you not to spend all your gift money in one place, which is his way of being affectionate without injuring himself emotionally. There may be a cake later. There may be a dinner. There may be a few relatives coming by, each carrying a present, a smile, and the conversational instincts of a detective. You know the questions will come. They will not arrive immediately. That would be too obvious. They will wait until after the candles, after someone mentions the cousin who just had a baby, after coffee is poured, and the room becomes comfortable enough for discomfort. Then someone will ask. So any special young man these days, and everyone will pretend the room has not leaned slightly toward your answer. The woman who reached 25 without a ring learned to prepare for these moments the way other people prepared for weather. She carried little answers in her purse. No one special right now. I've been busy with work. I'm not in any hurry. When the right man comes along, I'll know. Each answer had a purpose. Some were cheerful, some were modest, some were designed to end the conversation before Aunt Mildred could recommend a widower from church with 3 children and a suspiciously strong interest in canned peaches. But even the best answer could not stop the little look that followed. A soft smile, a sympathetic nod, a pause just long enough to suggest that people were making adjustments in their private expectations for you. At work, the day might be easier and harder at the same time. The office gave structure. You arrived in a neat skirt and blouse, placed your handbag in the drawer, rolled paper into the typewriter, and became useful in a way no one could easily question. Phones rang. Letters needed typing. Files needed finding. Men in suits needed rescuing from their own vague instructions. The office did not care that you were 25, at least not officially. The carbon copies had no opinion. The typewriter did not ask if you were seeing anyone, but people did. A co-worker might bring birthday cupcakes and say, "Make a wish." Another girl newly engaged might laugh and say, "You know what to wish for." She may mean it kindly. She may think it is harmless. But the whole room understands the joke before you've even blown out the imaginary candles. The empty ring finger became a kind of public silence. It said nothing, and people filled it with stories. Perhaps she was too particular. Perhaps she was too shy. Perhaps she'd been disappointed in love. Perhaps she worked too much. Perhaps she was waiting for someone who would never arrive. Perhaps she liked independence a little too much, which sounded almost dangerous when spoken by people who believed a woman should enjoy freedom only in small temporary servings. The truth could be much simpler. Maybe she had not met the right person. Maybe the right person had married someone else. Maybe the available men were pleasant but impossible to imagine across from her at breakfast for 40 years. Maybe she wanted marriage, but not badly enough to walk into the wrong one just to calm the room. Evenings could be the loneliest part, not always because she was alone, but because the world had taught her to interpret aloneness as evidence. She might come home from work, take off her shoes, set her gloves on the dresser and feel relief. No husband asking about dinner. No baby crying. No in-laws to visit. No one to explain herself to for a few quiet minutes. There was peace in that. Real peace. A little room of her own inside the day. But then the telephone might not ring, or a friend might cancel because her husband wanted to stay in, or another wedding invitation might arrive in the mail, thick and creamy and expensive looking, addressed to Miss So-and-so in a hand that seemed to underline the miss. Suddenly the quiet became less like rest and more like a question. Wedding invitations were especially skilled at finding tender places. They arrived with engraved names, church times, reception addresses, and the unspoken expectation that you would attend gracefully. You would buy a gift dress nicely, sit through the ceremony, smile in the receiving line and say the bride looked beautiful. And she did. She did look beautiful. You were not made of stone. You could love your friends, celebrate them, and still feel a small ache when the organ played. At the reception, someone might seat you beside an unmarried man as if solving 2 household problems with one centerpiece. He might be kind. He might be dull. He might spend 20 minutes explaining his job in insurance while you nodded with the patience of a saint and the inner life of a woman considering escape through the kitchen. The woman without a ring also became more visible to mothers of sons. Some saw her as a possibility. Others saw her as a caution. She might be praised for being capable, attractive, well-mannered and sensible, but always with the faint mystery of why she had not been claimed. That word was rarely spoken, but its shadow was there. Claimed, chosen, taken. As if adult womanhood were a coat check and someone had misplaced the ticket. She might attend church help at socials, visit relatives, remember anniversaries, and write thoughtful notes when someone was ill. She might be generous, funny, intelligent, and steady. But in many conversations, all that richness could be reduced to one fact. She never married. Or not yet, which was the more hopeful version polished and placed carefully on the mantel. And what did she feel? That is the part history often flattens. Some women felt embarrassed. Some felt frightened. Some felt angry, though anger had to be folded small and hidden under good manners. Some felt relieved, and then guilty for feeling relieved. Some wanted a husband so deeply they could hardly bear the cheerful advice. Others were beginning to suspect that the life expected of them might not fit, even if they had no language for another one. Many felt different things in the same week, sometimes in the same hour. A woman could enjoy her paycheck on Friday, cry after a wedding on Saturday, laugh with nieces on Sunday, and return to work Monday with her lipstick straight, and nobody the wiser. Human beings are inconveniently complicated that way, which is why they rarely fit into advice columns. There was quiet courage in simply continuing. The 25-year-old without a ring kept going to work, church family dinners, movies, showers, weddings and birthday parties, where the jokes about her future came wrapped in affection. She learned which questions to dodge, which smiles to return, and which women could be trusted with the truth. She learned that being unmarried did not mean being unloved, though some days society worked very hard to make it feel that way. She learned that freedom could be sweet and frightening, that loneliness could visit married and unmarried women alike, and that a ring could answer one question while opening several others. She learned perhaps slowly that a life did not become empty simply because other people could not label it quickly. Still, as night settled over the house and the birthday dishes were washed, she might sit on the edge of her bed and look at her hands. No diamond, no wedding band, just fingers that had typed letters, wrapped gifts, buttoned coats, held coffee cups, turned pages, folded laundry, and touched the edge of many lives. The world saw absence there, but there was presence too. Work, memory, hope, choice, fear, tenderness. A future not yet agreed upon by the committee of everyone else. 25 had arrived and the ring had not. Outside the window the neighbourhood grew quiet, porch lights glowing one by one. And somewhere in that quiet the question remained not as an ending but as a doorway into a more difficult part of the story. The words people used for unmarried women in 1950s. America were often small, but they carried long shadows. Spinster, old maid, career girl, poor dear, independent type, married to her work. They could be spoken softly over coffee tucked into family updates or delivered with a laugh that was meant to make them harmless. But words have a way of settling into a room. They can sit in the curtains, linger beside the sugar bowl, and follow a woman home long after the conversation has moved on to someone's new refrigerator. A woman without a ring by 25 might still be young, capable, attractive, funny, and full of plans. But in many communities, people began reaching for labels because labels were easier than admitting a woman's life might not follow the approved floor plan. Imagine yourself walking into a beauty parlour on a Thursday afternoon, the air warm with hairdryers setting, lotion perfumed cigarette smoke, and the soft buzz of women who know everything before the newspaper does. You sit under the dryer with a magazine on your lap while two women near the shampoo sink talk in voices just low enough to pretend they are being discreet. They mention Miss Caldwell from the school, still unmarried, very devoted to her students. Such a shame, really. Then they mention a woman at the bank who bought her own car. Imagine that. A woman buying a car without a husband to pretend it was his idea. Someone laughs. Someone says she is one of those career girls. The dryer hums around your ears like a beehive, but you hear every word. The spinster was one of the oldest ghosts in the room. She was imagined as lonely, fussy, severe, perhaps living with cats, lace curtains, and opinions no one had requested. She might be a school teacher, a librarian, a church organist, an aunt who remembered everyone's birthdays and was rewarded by being treated as if her life had somehow failed to become a proper story. The word reduced her to what she lacked, not her intelligence, her humour, her service, her friendships, her private pleasures, or the quiet ways she held families and communities together. Just no husband, no children, no wedding photograph on the mantel, a whole life folded down into an absence like a dress packed away and never worn. Then there was the old maid, a phrase that could sound almost comic in the mouths of people who did not have to fear becoming one. It appeared in jokes card games, family warnings, and little teasing comments directed at girls who are not yet old enough to understand the sting. Don't be an old maid, someone might say if a girl rejected a dance invitation or seemed too particular. The phrase trained girls early. It taught them that refusing the wrong man too many times might eventually become its own punishment. It suggested that being alone was not merely a condition, but a character flaw. A woman did not simply remain unmarried. She became the kind of woman who had remained unmarried, and that was treated as a diagnosis. The career girl was a newer figure, polished and suspicious in a different way. She wore good shoes, carried a handbag with purpose, and knew how to navigate an office without asking her father for directions. She might be a secretary teacher, nurse buyer, editor, clerk, librarian, bookkeeper, or department store worker. She paid rent, bought her own stockings, and knew the pleasure of a paycheck with her name on it. To some people she was modern and admirable for a while, especially if she was young and assumed to be working temporarily before marriage. But if she stayed too long, the admiration cooled. Her competence began to look like evidence. Perhaps she had chosen work over love. Perhaps she'd become too independent. Perhaps no man wanted a woman who could balance her own checkbook and identify nonsense before dessert. People loved to say a woman was married to her career as if the office had proposed with a diamond typewriter ribbon. The phrase was clever, or thought it was. It turned ambition into a substitute marriage, something slightly unnatural, almost comic and faintly sad. But many women worked because they needed money, supported relatives, enjoyed competence, or had no desire to sit at home waiting for a respectable man to appear like a well-dressed weather event. Some worked because marriage had not happened. Some because they were widowed, divorced helping parents, or simply good at what they did. But gossip rarely had patience for complexity. It preferred small explanations that fit comfortably between sips of coffee. At family gatherings, the labels came wrapped in concern. An aunt might say, "You don't want to end up like Miss Reynolds." Miss Reynolds, of course, might own her home, teach literature, bake excellent pies, and travel every summer with a friend from college. But because she had no husband, her entire life could be summoned as a warning while the potato salad was being passed. Someone might say, "She seems happy enough," and the enough would do all the damage. Happy enough, comfortable enough, busy enough. Not quite the real thing, but a decent substitute for a woman who missed the main road. It was amazing how often unmarried women were described as if their lives were casseroles that had not fully set. The whispers were not always vicious. That is what made them so difficult to fight. Many people were not trying to be cruel. They thought they were being practical, sympathetic, protective, even kind. They pitied women because they had been taught pity was the correct response. They worried because the world could be hard on women without husbands. They repeated old phrases because old phrases were available. A mother might fear that her daughter would become isolated. A neighbour might wonder who would take care of an unmarried woman when she was older. A church friend might assume that a woman who did not marry must be lonely because the culture had not given her many other pictures to look at. But concern can become a cage when it never asks whether the door should be open. The unmarried woman heard these whispers even when no one spoke to her directly. She heard them in pauses, in introductions, in the way people said, "This is Margaret, she works at the courthouse," while another woman was introduced as Tom's wife. She heard them when married friends apologized for talking about babies as if she were made of glass. She heard them when relatives praised her independence in the same tone they might use to praise a brave little dog standing in the rain. She heard them in the beauty parlour, the office, the church basement, the grocery aisle, the wedding reception. The world had many ways of reminding her that she was being studied, and still the women behind the labels lived actual lives. The spinster might come home from school, kick off her shoes, make tea, and read mystery novels with deep satisfaction. The career girl might buy a smart suit, earn a promotion, and feel the private pleasure of being trusted with real responsibility. The unmarried aunt might take nieces to the movies, remember family history, save money carefully, and provide the emotional steadiness everyone relied on but rarely celebrated. Some were lonely, some were not. Some wanted marriage, some had refused it. Some had loved and lost. Some had never met anyone worth rearranging their lives for. Some felt free in ways their married sisters envied quietly while scraping dinner plates. The labels also hid the fact that marriage itself did not guarantee happiness. Plenty of wives were lonely beside husbands. Plenty of mothers stood in bright kitchens feeling unseen. Plenty of women with wedding rings had their own private disappointments. But society often gave their sadness a respectable address. An unmarried woman's loneliness, if she had any, was treated as proof that she had chosen wrongly or been passed over. A married woman's loneliness was more easily hidden beneath duty. That difference mattered. The ring did not erase pain, but it protected a woman from certain kinds of explanation. Without it, people often treated her entire emotional life as public evidence. For a woman approaching 25, the fear was not only becoming single, it was becoming a story other people told. She feared being reduced to a phrase before she had finished becoming herself. She feared that every choice would be reinterpreted through the empty finger. If she was cheerful, she was putting on a brave face. If she was serious, she was bitter. If she was successful, she was compensating. If she dated, she was still trying. If she stopped dating, she had given up. There was almost no neutral behaviour available once a woman had been placed under the label lamp, and yet some women carried those labels with quiet defiance. They kept their jobs, their homes, their friendships, their habits, their savings accounts, their library cards, their church committees, their evenings at the movies, their walks through town, their letters, their private jokes, their small luxuries. They did not always make speeches about freedom. Many simply lived. In a world that wanted a husband to explain them, they became difficult to summarize. That was its own kind of rebellion, soft but durable. Not the rebellion of slogans or marches, but the rebellion of paying one's own bills, choosing one's own curtains, and refusing to vanish just because society had misplaced its imagination. So when people whispered about spinsters and career girls, they were whispering about more than unmarried women. They were whispering about fear. Fear of women who did not follow the timetable. Fear of lives that could not be neatly arranged around a husband's name. Fear that the approved path might not be the only path. And perhaps beneath all that fear that some women outside marriage were not merely surviving, but sometimes breathing a little easier. That possibility was harder to discuss than pity, so people reached for pity instead. Tonight, imagine one of those women walking home at dusk, handbag tucked under her arm, office shoes, tapping softly against the sidewalk. She passes houses where dinner is being set on tables, where husbands are arriving, where children are calling from yards, where radios glow in front rooms. Her own room waits ahead, quiet and tidy. Maybe she wishes someone were waiting there. Maybe she does not. Maybe the truth changes by the day. But she unlocks the door, steps inside, turns on a lamp, and for a moment she belongs entirely to herself. Outside, the world may whisper. Inside, the kettle begins to warm. The evening settles gently around her, and the story people tell about her is not the only story in the room. The marriage deadline in 1950s. America was never the same clock for every woman. It did not tick with equal volume in every house, every neighborhood, every church basement, or every workplace. The familiar story of the young white middle-class woman expected to marry early, move to a suburb, buy curtains, and become a cheerful wife, by 25 is only one version of the pressure. It is an important version because magazines, television advertisements, and popular memory repeated it loudly. But it was never the whole room. Across America, race, class, religion, region, family background as economic necessity changed what marriage meant when it was expected, and what happened if it did not arrive on schedule. Imagine the polished picture first, because that is the one the culture liked to frame. A white middle-class daughter in a tidy post-war neighborhood. A father with a steady income. A mother who manages the home. A daughter who may work for a few years, perhaps attend college, perhaps type letters in an office, but is expected to marry before anyone worries too loudly. For her, 25 might feel like a social alarm, because the community around her has imagined a particular path: dating, engagement, wedding house, children, PTA, and a kitchen full of modern appliances that promise to save labor, while somehow creating more of it. Her pressure is wrapped in softness, advice, introductions, bridal magazines, church socials, the concerned look over dessert. It is quiet, but it is everywhere. Now step a few streets away, or a few miles, or into another part of town entirely, and the story begins to change. For working-class women, marriage could still be expected, still valued, still watched, but the timeline might be shaped by wages, housing, family responsibilities, factory shifts, service jobs, and the practical question of survival. A young woman might leave school earlier, work in a shop, a diner, a laundry, a mill, a telephone office, or a department store, and hand part of her paycheck to her mother before she ever thought about choosing china patterns. She might date yes and face questions about marriage, but she might also be expected to help keep younger siblings fed, pay bills, care for an elderly relative, or postpone her own plans because the household needed her wages. In that world, marriage was not only romance or respectability, it was economics with a bouquet. For some working-class families, a daughter marrying could be a relief but also a loss. One less mouth to feed, perhaps, but also one less paycheck in the envelope. A husband might promise stability, or he might bring new burdens if his work was uncertain. There were women who married young because it seemed like the clearest route to adulthood privacy or a home of their own. There were also women who delayed because money was tight, housing was scarce, or the men around them were not ready to provide the kind of security families hoped for. The cheerful middle-class phrase settling down could sound different when settling down required rent, heating bills, bus fare, groceries, and a husband whose wages might disappear with the layoff. A ring was still a symbol, but the rent collector did not accept symbols. For black women in 1950s America, especially under segregation and racial discrimination, marriage pressure existed inside a much harsher set of realities than the glossy magazines usually admitted. Respectability mattered deeply in many black communities, not because people simply copied white middle-class standards, but because dignity, family stability, church life and public conduct could become forms of protection in a hostile society. A young black woman might face expectations to marry, build a family, preserve reputation, and contribute to community strength. But she also faced restricted job opportunities, unequal schooling, housing, discrimination, racial violence in some places, and public systems that often treated black family life with suspicion rather than support. The question was not merely whether she would marry before 25. It was what kind of world would allow her marriage, her work, her safety, and her dreams to breathe. In many black communities, churches extended family networks. Women's clubs, schools, and neighborhood organizations carried enormous weight. A daughter's reputation could be carefully guarded not only for social approval, but because the consequences of gossip, vulnerability, or disrespect could be more severe in a racially unequal society. Marriage could be seen as honorable, stabilizing, and protective, but economic reality often required women to work before and after marriage. The neat fantasy of a wife leaving paid labor forever did not apply evenly. Many black women, like many working-class women of all races, had always worked. Domestic service teaching, nursing, clerical work where available, laundry, caregiving, factory labor, and community labor all shaped women's lives. The idea that a wife's proper place was only in the home could sound very different to a woman whose household needed her income and whose mother and grandmother had worked all their lives. Mexican American, Puerto Rican, Asian American, Native American, immigrant, Catholic, Jewish, rural and regional communities each carried their own expectations too. In some families, marriage was tied strongly to religion, kinship, cultural continuity and family honor. In others, economic mobility or education shaped the timing. A Catholic daughter might hear marriage discussed alongside faith family size and the sacramental meaning of domestic life. A Jewish daughter in a close community might face expectations about marrying within the faith, maintaining family continuity, and balancing education with domestic future. A daughter of immigrants might feel pressure not only to marry, but to marry correctly, respectably, and in a way that honored the sacrifices of parents who had crossed oceans, borders, languages, or poverty. The age might matter, but so did who he was, where he came from, what he believed, and whether the family could recognize him as part of the story. In rural America, the marriage clock could sound different again. Life on farms and in small towns often bound marriage to labor land, family duty, and community knowledge so intimate it could make privacy feel like a luxury item. A young woman might be expected to marry someone local, someone known, someone whose family had a name people could place on a road in a church pew or beside a feed store account. Courtship could be public because everything in a small town was public, including who drove past whose house and how long the porch light stayed on. But farm daughters and rural working women also knew work in a way that did not match the suburban fantasy. They cooked, cleaned, cared, canned, milked, gardened, kept accounts, helped with crops, and learned that romance still had to get up early. Marriage was not an escape from work. It was often a transfer into another household's work with a different last name attached. Class also shaped the fear of becoming a so-called old maid. A middle-class woman might be pitied for not marrying because she had not entered the expected domestic ideal. A poor woman might be judged differently, sometimes more harshly, sometimes more practically. If she remained unmarried, did she have work, family, housing? Was she caring for relatives? Did she have children? Could she survive on her wages? Respectability was not only emotional, it was material. A woman with money, education, and family support might create a single life with some independence, though not without gossip. A woman without those cushions could find singleness far more precarious. The question, why isn't she married, could hide another question underneath: how will she live? And then there were women whose lives did not fit the marriage story at all, though the 1950s often gave them little safe language. Some women did not desire men. Some women formed deep partnerships with other women. Some lived with companions, cousins, roommates, or friends in arrangements that outsiders politely misunderstood or deliberately refused to understand. Some men and women could not marry the people they loved because of race law, family pressure, religion class, or sexuality. For them, the public marriage deadline was not just pressure. It could be a mask, a threat, or a door locked from the outside. The polite question, "Why aren't you married?" assumed that everyone had the same choices. Many did not. The popular image of the 1950s liked to pretend there was one American woman, one American dream, one American kitchen, and one correct path to happiness. But real life was far more crowded and uneven. Some women feared 25 because relatives worried about their youth fading. Some feared it because economic options were narrow. Some barely had time to fear it because they were working, caregiving, surviving, or navigating discrimination that made the suburban bridal fantasy feel like a distant radio program from someone else's house. Some felt pressure to marry early. Some were expected to delay until a proper match appeared. Some had to marry for security. Some avoided marriage because they had seen too clearly what the wrong husband could cost. So when we speak of the 1950s marriage deadline, we must hold the story gently but not too neatly. It was real for many women, but it did not operate in one simple way. The clock on the suburban mantel was not the same as the clock in a farm kitchen, a segregated schoolhouse, a city boarding room, a Catholic parish hall, a Jewish family apartment, a factory town, a reservation community, an immigrant neighborhood, or a working mother's rented flat. Each clock had its own sound. Some ticked with gossip, some with money, some with family honor, some with safety, some with loneliness, some with ambition pressing quietly against the walls. And yet across all these differences one thread remains. Women were often asked to explain themselves in relation to marriage. Whether they married young, married late, never married, worked, stayed home, loved, waited, resisted, or simply tried to get through the week, their choices were measured against rules they had not written. That is the hidden pressure beneath the nostalgic photograph. Not that every woman had the same life, but that so many were asked to make their lives understandable to others before they were allowed to understand them for themselves. And as the evening settles over all those different homes, different streets, different kitchens, and different futures, the marriage clock keeps ticking in many voices, never quite the same but rarely silent. Marrying before you were ready in 1950s, America did not always look like tragedy from the outside. That is what made it so easy to miss. There might be a church full of flowers, a white dress pressed to perfection, a handsome young man standing nervously at the front and a reception table covered with cake punch-folded napkins and women saying how lucky the bride was. The photographs looked lovely. The announcement in the local paper sounded proper. The families smiled with relief. Everyone could finally stop asking when and start saying how beautiful. But underneath the lace, the rice, the rented suit, and the new towels waiting in a new apartment, there could be a quiet question the bride had never been allowed enough time to answer. Did I choose this life, or did I simply reach the age when everyone became frightened I might not? Imagine yourself on the morning after the wedding waking up in a small apartment or a little starter house that still smells of fresh paint, furniture polish, and gifts from relatives. The curtains are new, the sheets are new, the dishes are stacked in unfamiliar cabinets. Your name may be new too, written carefully on envelopes, checks, and thank you notes until it begins to feel like a dress you've not yet broken in. Yesterday you were celebrated. Today, you are a wife. The word has arrived all at once, carrying dishes, expectations, laundry, affection, fear, and a husband who is also learning his role, though society has given him far fewer instructions about how much smiling will be required before breakfast. You sit on the edge of the bed for a moment and listen to the quiet. It is not unhappy. Not exactly. It is simply larger than you expected. The cost of marrying too soon was often not dramatic enough to be named. It appeared in small hesitations, in the job you left before you knew whether you wanted to leave it, in the college course you did not finish, in the friend group that suddenly became harder to see. In the suitcase of girlhood, things moved into a closet beside a man's shirts. In the way everyone congratulated you on becoming settled, while some restless part of you quietly asked whether settled meant placed or planted or simply stopped. A young bride could love her husband and still feel that her own life had narrowed faster than her heart could understand. She could be grateful and grieving at the same time, which is a very difficult combination to explain over scrambled eggs. The culture often treated marriage as the end of uncertainty. Once a woman had a ring, a husband, and a shared address, the questions were supposed to calm down. But marriage had its own interrogation. Was dinner ready? Were you keeping house properly? Were you planning children? Were you making your husband comfortable? Were you fitting into his family? Were you cheerful enough? Sensible enough? Feminine enough? A woman who married under pressure might discover that the public deadline had only delivered her into a private schedule. The old question, when will you marry, disappeared. In its place came 1,000 quieter ones, each tucked into the daily routine like pins in a sewing basket. Some women married men they liked, respected, even loved, but before they fully knew themselves. That is one of the gentler sorrows of the era. The problem was not always a bad husband. Sometimes the husband was decent. He worked hard, came home tired, paid bills, remembered to bring flowers on anniversaries if properly reminded by the calendar or his mother. The trouble was timing. A girl who'd been taught to move from daughter to bride to wife might never have had a season of being simply herself. She had not lived alone. She'd not learned the sound of her own preferences without the family listening. She had not discovered whether she wanted work, study, travel, quiet, children soon, children later, or perhaps a life that unfolded differently from the bridal shower script. Marriage arrived before self-knowledge, and then self-knowledge had to grow in the narrow spaces between grocery lists and his socks on the floor. There was also the quiet cost of lowered standards, though few people would have called it that at the time. Families often advise girls not to be too particular, not to wait forever, not to expect perfection. There was wisdom in knowing that no human being arrives without flaws. But there was danger in teaching women to confuse reasonable compromise with surrender. A man who was dull could become safe. A man who was controlling could be called protective. A man who dismissed a woman's dreams could be described as practical. A man with a temper might be explained as tired from work. The rush to avoid being unmarried could make warning signs look like ordinary weather. And once the wedding photograph was framed, it became much harder to say the sky had been dark all along. For some brides, the first months of marriage were tender and full of discovery. They learned each other's habits, built routines, laughed over burnt dinners, saved for furniture, and found genuine comfort in partnership. We should not erase that. Many young marriages were loving, resilient, and meaningful. Many women wanted the life they entered and made it with skill, warmth, and pride. But for others, the pressure to marry early meant stepping into adulthood before they had enough power to negotiate its terms. They became wives before they had practiced saying no. They became homemakers before they had learned whether home was a place they could shape or merely maintain. They became responsible for emotional peace in a household where their own unrest had no approved place to sit. The wedding gifts could become symbols of this transformation. The towels, the sheets, the casserole dishes, the mixing bowls, the toaster, the good china kept behind cabinet doors. Each item was useful, and yet each one reminded her what the community believed she had become. She was now the person who would wash the towels, change the sheets, fill the casserole dish, clean the toaster crumbs, and protect the china from both dust and careless husbands. Domestic objects can be loving. They can also be quiet contracts. A bride who had not been ready might look around at all those beautiful gifts and feel surrounded not by generosity but by assignment. Leaving work could be another cost. Many women were expected to stop working after marriage, or certainly after children, depending on family income, local norms and class. Some were relieved to leave jobs that had offered little respect. Others missed the paycheck, the office friendships, the daily proof that they were competent outside the home. A young wife might find herself in a house at 10 in the morning, the beds made the dishes, done the radio humming, and no one there to see her as anything but wife. The loneliness could be confusing because she'd been told marriage cured loneliness. If she felt lonely now, what did that mean? The culture had not prepared her for that question. It had prepared her to polish the table. Children often came quickly or were expected to. A bride who had married to satisfy one deadline could soon find another one waiting. When will you start a family? The question arrived almost before the cake crumbs were swept away. Motherhood could bring joy, purpose, and deep love. It could also arrive before a young woman had recovered from becoming a wife. A woman who barely knew how to share a household might suddenly be expected to manage a baby, a husband, a budget, a kitchen, and her own vanishing sense of self. Everyone called it natural. Natural is a word people often use when they do not want to discuss labour. There was very little room to admit regret. A woman who had married before she was ready could not easily say so without alarming the household. Her mother might hear it as accusation. Her husband might hear it as rejection. Her community might hear it as ingratitude. After all, she had what everyone said she needed: a husband, a home, a respectable place in the world. What more could she want? That question was one of the most quietly damaging of all. What more could she want? Maybe time, maybe choice, maybe a room in which to hear her own thoughts, maybe the freedom to have chosen the same man later, with a fuller heart and a stronger voice. So she adapted as many women did. She learned recipes. She learned his moods. She learned which relatives required careful handling. She learned to stretch money, remove stains, smile at neighbours, and write thank you notes that made gratitude sound effortless. She might grow into the marriage. She might build real affection. She might become strong in ways nobody noticed because they called it duty. Or she might carry a small private ache for years, not enough to leave, not enough to name, but enough to make her pause sometimes at the kitchen window and wonder who she might have become if the world had not rushed her toward the altar with such gentle hands. The quiet cost of marrying before you were ready was not always visible in divorce scandal or misery. Often it was visible only in the difference between the woman in the wedding photograph and the woman washing dishes at midnight 6 months later. The photograph showed certainty. The kitchen showed practice. The photograph showed a chosen bride. The kitchen showed a person learning to live inside a choice that had been shaped by love, fear, family timing, and social pressure all at once. That is why the story deserves tenderness. Not because every early marriage was wrong, but because every woman deserved the time to know whether it was right. And as the house settles for the night, with the radio low, the dishes drying, and the wedding gifts arranged neatly in their new places, she stands for a moment in the soft kitchen light. Somewhere in a drawer, the thank you notes are not finished. Somewhere in the bedroom, her husband is already asleep. Somewhere in the past, a girl without a ring feared being left behind. Now the ring is on her hand, and the question has changed shape. It is no longer whether she will be chosen. It is whether inside the life everyone celebrated she will still be able to choose herself. The 1950s marriage deadline still haunts American memory because it was never only about marriage. It was about time, approval, womanhood, family pride, and the quiet fear of becoming difficult to explain. It lived in birthday candles, bridal showers, church, socials, office, lunches, family dinners, and the soft little pause after someone noticed an empty ring finger. It was not a law. No calendar on the wall officially declared that a woman must find a husband by 25 or be escorted gently into social concern. But culture has always had ways of making unwritten rules feel more powerful than written ones. A woman could ignore a rule on paper. It was much harder to ignore a rule spoken by mothers, magazines, neighbours, pastors, co-workers, aunts, and the expression on someone's face when she said she was still single. When we look back now, the old photographs can make the story seem simpler than it was. There are smiling brides outside churches, young couples beside automobiles, women in full skirts standing in new kitchens, men in suits holding babies, families gathered around dining tables where everything looks bright, orderly, and safe. The images are beautiful. They are part of why the decade still glows in memory. Chrome appliances, soft curls, evening radio, white gloves, corsages, department store windows, wedding announcements clipped and saved in family albums. But old photographs are very skilled at keeping secrets. They rarely show the daughter trying to decide whether she loved him enough, or the office girl wondering if her paycheck made her less marriageable, or the 25-year-old smiling through another joke about being next. The marriage deadline haunts us because it reveals how a whole society can turn private life into public performance. Love was not simply love. Dating was not simply dating. Engagement was not simply two people making a promise. Every step had witnesses. A girl was watched as she became popular enough, steady enough, respectable enough, chosen enough. The corsage, the class ring, the diamond, the shower gifts, the wedding photograph, each one served as proof that she was moving correctly through life. And if the proof did not appear on time, people began to worry. That worry could be tender, it could be practical, it could be cruel. Most often it was all three served in a polite cup with cream and sugar. It also haunts us because the pressure was so ordinary. No villain needed to appear. No single person had to be wicked. A mother could love her daughter and still frighten her with advice. An aunt could be funny and still wound her with comparisons. A church community could offer belonging and still narrow the imagination. A friend could celebrate her own engagement and accidentally make another woman feel left behind. That is the unsettling part of hidden rules. They do not always arrive as commands. They arrive as concern. They arrive as jokes. They arrive as traditions everyone follows because everyone else seems to follow them. Then one day a woman looks around and realizes the room has been telling her what to do for years, and yet we should be careful not to flatten the women of the 1950s into victims of a deadline. They were more complicated than that. Some wanted marriage with their whole hearts and found real happiness in it. Some built loving homes, raised children with patience, supported husbands, managed households with skill, and created warmth that lasted for generations. Some chose the expected path and still made it their own. Others entered marriage too early, too unsure, or too pressured, and spent years trying to grow inside a life that had closed around them before they had finished becoming themselves. Some never married and built quiet, useful, rich lives that the culture did not know how to praise properly. All of them deserve more than nostalgia and more than judgment. They deserve attention. The idea of being too late is what lingers. Too late for love. Too late for children. Too late to be chosen. Too late to become the kind of woman other people understood. That fear did not disappear with the 1950s. It changed clothing. It moved into different decades, different expectations, different clocks. Today people may not whisper about 25 in the same way, at least not everywhere. But many still know the feeling of being measured against a timetable. Married by this age, successful by that age, a home by then, children before then, a career before it is too late, a body that stays young, a life that looks explainable from the outside. The old deadline haunts us because we still live with clocks we did not build. There is something especially poignant about the young woman standing at the mirror in these stories. She's not a symbol to herself. She's simply getting ready. She's adjusting her dress, checking her lipstick, smoothing one stubborn curl, listening for her mother downstairs, wondering whether the evening will matter. Around her the world has placed meanings she may not fully understand yet. Her youth is currency. Her manners are evidence. Her beauty is a chance. Her singleness is a question. Her future is discussed in kitchens before she's had enough time to discuss it with herself. And still she hopes. That is what makes her human. She wants love, perhaps, or freedom, or both. Or just one evening in which no one turns her life into a schedule. The 1950s marriage deadline also reminds us how deeply women's choices were tied to security. To say a woman should marry was often to say she should be safe, provided for, respected, and socially protected. That does not excuse the pressure, but it helps us understand it. Many families knew a single woman could face limited wages, narrow job opportunities, gossip housing difficulties, and old age without the protection society gave wives. Parents pushed daughters toward marriage partly because they feared the world outside it. The tragedy is that instead of making the world wider for women, many people taught women to fit themselves into the safest available room. And what of the women who did not fit the unmarried teacher, the aunt with the steady job, the office woman who stayed too long, the church volunteer? Everyone depended on the daughter who cared for parents, the woman who loved differently, the friend who smiled at every bridal shower while quietly choosing another life. They remain in the shadows of the decade, but they were always there. Their lives complicate the myth. They remind us that history is not only made by those who followed the rule, but also by those who lived around it, beneath it, against it, or beyond it. Some suffered from the judgment, some found small freedoms, some did both. Their stories are quieter, but quiet does not mean empty. So perhaps this is why the deadline still feels so powerful in memory. It sits at the meeting point of romance and fear. It shows how a culture can turn love into proof, marriage into rescue, and age into a warning bell. It shows how women were praised for being chosen before they were always encouraged to choose. It shows how a ring could bring joy, relief, status, and pressure all at once. It shows how a life could look perfect in a photograph while carrying questions no one asked out loud. Tonight, as we let this old story settle, we can hold the decade gently without polishing it too brightly. We can remember the dances, the corsages, the wedding cakes, the hope chests, the church bells, the soft radio music, and the girls laughing in soda fountain booths before life separated them into wives, mothers, workers, caretakers, and women no label could hold. But we can also remember the quiet pressure behind the pretty things, the birthdays that felt like warnings, the advice that sounded like love and fear at the same time, the women who married happily, the women who married too soon, the women who did not marry and had to become brave in rooms that kept asking why. And if you're listening now from your own quiet room, maybe long after the house is settled and the day has loosened its grip, take one slow breath for those women. For the girl in the prom dress, for the office worker on the bus, for the bride opening towels at her shower, for the 25-year-old blowing out candles while everyone pretended not to count, for the unmarried woman turning on a lamp in her own room and discovering that the story people told about her was not the only story that mattered. History is full of clocks, but it is also full of people who kept living after the bell rang. Thank you for spending this quiet journey with the Nostalgian. If these soft stories about hidden rules, old American life, and the forgotten pressure behind familiar photographs keep you company, subscribe and come back again tomorrow night. There will always be another porch light glowing somewhere in the past, another kitchen radio playing low, another rule no one wrote down, and another ordinary person trying to live gently inside it. Sleep well, and remember, not every life arrives on schedule. Some of the truest ones take their own time.